A lot of y'all pseudoscientists, you be fraud as hell. Your granddaddy did it, then you did it, you can rot in hell. I don't know who with me or against me, it be hard to tell. Chaos energy, I'm heated, it get hot as hell. Man, it feel good to be Aboriginal. 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 Everybody tribe up, had to be major. Yeah, I got my melanin. Guilty without no evidence. All natural, you know me. Jury, it's on me. Swagger, you matter. That's making me chase a fatter. Michael Jackson, but I'm better. Fuck all lives matter. All my teachers, all nine ether powers. I ain't got all mine either. I don't need a preacher, I just go within. We don't need a leader, no, we gonna win. I see apples with the win again. Tell a friend, we going in. All kids still ain't kin. Y'all heard the tribunal? They sweat us dead like funerals. Winning record like Keno. Fly a lot like UFO. Joe Biden, you a hoe. You a hoe and you not original. We ain't going nowhere, you pitiful. We keep coming right back, residual. We over here lit. You know fuck about who you with. We just correcting our status and shit. What do you know about your citizenship? What do you know about your status and shit? I hate suffixes like shit. Whole system ain't shit. Do something about this shit. You ain't gotta say it something like a king. This is what I seen when I had a dream. Shoulda had a scene. Do the right thing. Carbon-based beam.
Peace. Paradise to all American Aborigines. Supreme Chief Holidays in the building. I want to send a special shout out to y'all big homie, the one and only Tap CEOs in the building. Let's see what we got in the building. We got Yamasi Twan. Shout out to Yamasi Twan, first Aborigine in the building. I want to say peace to the God, man. Hey, we're going to pull up a few tunes, you guys. Let a few people get up in here, man. We got DJ Tasco on the ones and twos tonight, you guys. Do us a favor. Like, share, subscribe. You already know, man. Support the real. Support the only builders, man. Only builders. Only builders. Only builders. Only builders 2022 at gmail.com, man. Tap in. Only builders, man. Got a lot of great things coming down the pipe, man. It's gonna be a great summer. It's a great summer already, man. Shout out to everybody, man. Tapped in, man. Real talk. Shout out to original Anglo-Saxon Berber. Saxon Berber in the building. The original. Got Barkham Live. Peace to the guys, man. Hey, man, we got the Underhog in the building, man. Mr. LV, Free A-State, Mills, yay, 421. Let's go. Mr. Go.
Nigga flow so sick, hit rewind. Little bit, call my phone, hit decline. Nigga want me to phone, but tell him keep trying. Been ballin' on niggas out of retire. Yeah, one time, turn the beat down. Let a nigga go crazy, see now. Fell off, got it back, had to retry. Bitch sour and shit, had to remind.
That's good, man. It's big dog, straight drop. Yeah. I'm white, mayo. Everything good as a 10-4.
Pour some drink, roll up some ganja. I'm about to blow like a motherfucking roster. Big dog status, you know I ain't flogging. Go in the way that I want, I ain't bothering.
Yellow bone with me, feeling like a martyr. She wanna kick it, she my no karate. I just want head, I don't want nobody. Might take a nigga, bitch, that's a rob.
That whole back, stop it, nigga. Ain't no motherfucking option, nigga. Oh, I got your little hoe up on my side like a motherfucking option, nigga.
Big black nigga, my persona. Yes, I'm guilty, Your Honor. Of killing these niggas and fucking these bitches. Yes, I admit to the charges.
ABR be the mafia. Tell them ain't nobody stopping us. Lot of sucker niggas wanna copy us. Still dripping on the floor, you can mop it.
Let me pop my shit. Niggas be killing me. Gotta swap my shit. Niggas watch my shit. Since you niggas stealing, well, let me lock my shit. Let me stop my shit. Yeah, I'm from the bottom, but that don't stop not shit. Bitch, I'm an underdog. I mean, underhog. Still, nothing top my shit. Bitch, I'm the truth. And I showed you over and over again. This shit ain't no fluke. This is the proof. I set the bar in this bitch, and I'ma raise it like a roof. They counted me out. Yeah, they gotta be tripping. I don't know shit about addition. Subtracting myself from anything bullshitting. I move forward, that's condition. Since I do music, now I gotta move different. Be damn, I move without a tools. And rappers is dangerous, and I just can't be caught slipping. Be damn, I let a nigga do me. I ain't no killer, but I ain't never scared to shoot it. Don't run up on me like a groupie. We got some beef, nigga shells come included. This won't be a Taco Tuesday.
Las Vegas, stand up. East Side, St. Louise, Summer Love. Let's
Show
go.
me something you ain't never showed them other niggas. Even when you caught off guard, you still a perfect picture. Oh, I stole that game from Brody, baby, come console me. We been fucking for so long, it's hard to remain homies. Once you let me taste that pussy, you could never broke me. I say I love you while I'm faded, you should never quote me. Home alone, hey Miss McCauley, keep it dripping for me. Two bitches licking while I'm sticking, you be getting naughty. Could you ride for? Scrolling through a gallery of niggas that done broke your heart. You been acting clueless, don't know where to start. Never how they paint you, but you always been a work of art. Heartbreak on the spotlight, it and turn you to a superstar. Ooh, you damaged. Broken love spilling all over the campus. Broken hearts, they made it clear they didn't love. You a perfect bitch. Ooh. But it understand you a perfect bitch. Ooh. But it understand
T.O.P. Let's go.
Yeah. Hey man, all I'm saying is, nigga, you always got something to say. It's like you don't shut up. On the track.
A lot of niggas died 1865. Single Michael fled, highway ain't gon' let it ride. Everybody hot and black was never on your side. They you maps to tell your apps where you sleep at night. They put that white man on. Got you begging them for answers like that white man know. Had you swearing you was African, that's that white man home. Had you proud to be a savage, that's that white man zone. And I ain't talking shit, this my definition. If being savage was our nature, y'all be non-existent. We done took your ass out when we was in them kitchens. Instead of showing you how to live and how to maintain business. White supremacy fake. Only way that shit real is if you do what they say. We we the guards to the gate. So when they say they fear God, now you know what they made. Shoot some, move some, shoot some, move some.
Put us in the same room, it gon' go down. Hit a nigga with that boom, he gon' go down.
Shoot some, move some, shoot some, move some.
Put us in the same room, it gon' go down. Hit a nigga with that boom, he gon' go down.
Every day my niggas dying, they don't know the truth. How the hell you close to God, we don't know it's you. Yo, how the hell you supposed to survive, we don't know the shoot. He should've died, you let him slide, cause he look just like you. I tried to tell him all skin ain't kin. Everybody ain't your partner, everybody ain't your friend. How the hell they supposed to help when they the ones that put you in? They don't struggle how we struggle, they can't get it how we live. Can't be scared to die when we already dead. Either way, your life is safe no matter how you play it. My higher self said we should choose remain godly. My lower want these motherfucking bodies. Infiltrate they circles like a motherfucking Audi. Take them to the south and put them down like OG Bobby. They don't want equality in this club, they want these problems. Killers right beside me, slab full of chicken moppers. Shoot some, move some, shoot some, move some.
Put us in the same room, it gon' go down. Hit a nigga with that boom, he gon' go down.
Shoot some, move some, shoot some, move some.
Put us in the same room, it gon' go down. Hit a nigga with that boom, he gon' go down.
Hey man, shout out to everybody been tapped in, man. Let me see what we got in the building. Big Dog, Shy Apples, Leonard the Huda, Darius Matthews. I say peace to the guys, man. Shout out to everybody tapped in. So tonight's show, you guys, it's another debunking show, man. We're gonna be debunking you know what we say, guys. We always check the checkers, the fact checkers, you know what I'm saying? Hold on 1 second.
I know these niggas can't stand me. If they want a verse and they paying me. Like I don't do this for the family. They're for the birds, fuck 'em. And you know that's off the muscle. If it ain't no money involved, it's over my tolerance, zero, Russell. You know, for sure. Yes, sir, I'm back in that mode. I got them calling me Russell. That boy that out of control. That nigga lip, zip. Yeah, that boy that like a hoe. I guess I'm back in my bowl. Look like I'm back on that stove. You know, for sure. Yes, sir, I'm back in that mode. I got them calling me Russell. That boy that out of control. That nigga lip, zip. Yeah, that boy that like a hoe. I guess I'm back in my bowl. Look like I'm back on that stove.
Yes, sir, I'm back in that mode. Worth on my shine, I'm a beast.
I'm kinda getting obese. Doctor said I had to stop eating beets. I'm a red-nosed pig, far from a stray, but I've been off the leash. Got ties with the mic, capiche. Say you want a feature for me, shit is gonna cost you a fee. You know, got Bobby back in that mode. Ever since Dizzle came home, got word that Dolo got on. You know, for sure, created a lane of my own. So how the fuck you put me on? What kind of dope you smoking on? Let's go. My tolerance zero, Gilbert arenas. Me, my niggas keep them glitz in arenas. In the 7 Series Beamer, with a splash of Alpina. Name a fat, a nigga cleaner. Got a bitch in Howard named Medina. Got a bitch in Howard named. Come on, man.
Show. That's where I'm back in that mode. I got them calling me Russell. That boy that out of control. Got nigga lip, zip. Yeah, that boy that like a hoe. I guess I'm back in my bowl. Look like I'm back on that stove. You know, for sure. That's where I'm back in that mode. I got them calling me Russell. That boy that out of control. Got nigga lip, zip. Yeah, that boy that like a hoe. I guess I'm back in my bowl. Look like I'm back on that stove.
You know I'm back in that mode. This shit like crack on the stove. Pass up the dope that make no, yeah, he cook it up. That's why they back in the shows. Said she wanna link up with me. I put her ass on the bowl. You know I'm strapped with that pole. I put that pap to your nose. Go hard in the paint and I smash on these pussies. I'm feeling like Shaq in the post. I'm gon' keep it cool, I'm go hard in these pussies until I get tagged in the post. I did my research, he ain't got no credentials, but homie be bragging the most. Watch me dismantle the goat. I have your ass on the ropes.
You know, for sure. Yes, sir, I'm back in that mode. I got them calling me Russell. That boy that out of control. Got nigga lip, zip. Yeah, that boy that like a hoe. I guess I'm back in my bowl. Look like I'm back on that stove. You know, for sure. Yes, sir, I'm back in that mode. I got them calling me Russell. That boy that out of control. Got nigga lip, zip. Yeah, that boy that like a hoe. I guess I'm back in my bowl. Look like I'm back on that stove. You know,
I really like that. You better ask, bitch, I'm a cheat code. I let niggas have their time, but I want it back. Bitch, it's a repo. They hating it, fuck. This now my roommate. Stay with me. I feel like I'm Russell. These boys the rent, they don't wanna play with me. Back in that mode, no more of the brakes, I'm back on the gas. I'm talking my back bike. What the fuck is you saying? I'm back on their ass. I'm live from the kitchen. I'm back in my bowl, they missing my whip. Hey, wait, let me fix it. I noticed that dope, but then let me zip it. Yeah, young nigga ready. I'm a little nigga, bitch, but I'm heavy. Off the muscle, I come in here flex. Bitch, I'm mean, ain't shit and arrest. You know what going on, ain't no guessing. Who the fuck said I was gone? Whoever said it was wrong? 2, 3, I'm back in my zone. You know?
for sure. Yes, sir, I'm back in that mode.
All right, we back in the building, you guys. Everybody just came up in here. Shout out to ATF, General Peace. Appreciate everybody, man. Tapped in, man. Do us a favor, man. Like, share, subscribe, man. Put this on all your social media platforms, man. And tag me in, man. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, man. Telegram. I know it's a late night bill, but it's early somewhere in the world, man. So let us know where you guys tapped in from around the planet. So we appreciate you guys. Like I said, this is a debunking show, so we're going to be debunking. It's late night bills, you guys, man. You have a lot of things going on. You guys are trying to get done. So we still want to squeeze these shows in, man. So say, man, we're going to get this in tonight. I think we're going to be all right. This video also kind of like visual aids, man. A lot of times you guys want to hear from other people, you know, validate some of the stuff. And, you know, so while your sahibs here, man, we can go through and decipher some of these things. Because, you know, they're going to always have the trigger in the forked tongue, you know, what they're doing. Fact check the fact check. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to be getting into this book tonight called The Myths That Made America. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We talk about myths, you know, and so it's a lot of myths that people believe in that they push, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if you guys, some of you guys caught the Aboriginal Horror Show we did Saturday. Shout out to Lotus, man. We went into some of the myths Christopher Columbus being one of them. You know, you guys seen, we went into that already, you know, but just the whole myth, you know, of Christopher Columbus, you know what I'm saying, being this heroes. Did you guys know that he was on the $5 bill before? Like Christopher Columbus used to be on our money, $5 bill. Now, and stories change. You guys gonna see some stuff tonight. It's really interesting. So yeah, we're gonna. This right here is lies. Can you see the things covered up right there? Everything your teachers got wrong, myths, education, and stuff like that. So this is 1995. Keep that in the back of your mind. So it's 1995, man. So let's just get right into this thing, man. Hey, man, press go if you truly descend from the greatest human beings on the planet's history, man. Press go. It's the GOAT. Let's go. I want to say fair use for educational entertainment purposes, man. Under ADRIP, UNDRIP, and all the other good treaties and things that they have. Let's go.
James Lowen, author of Lies My Teacher Told Me. Can you remember a lie that your teacher told you and when?
Oh, yes. Some of the lies, I have to admit, are lies of omissions. I remember learning when I was 42 years old that the United States had put troops into the Soviet Union in order to support the white side of the white-red civil war that was going on in 1918. And I learned that those troops stayed there 2 years in conjunction with Japanese troops and some British and French naval support. They went all the way to Lake Baikal in the middle of Siberia. We also had troops up in Murmansk and Archangel up near Norway. And I thought, how is it that I, a history minor in college, never learned that? So I went back to my college history book written by Richard Hofstetter et al. And I found everything that Hofstetter had deigned to tell me about that invasion, we could really call it. And it was the following half sentence, speaking about World War I. American troops were withdrawn from Europe by 1918, with the exception of a contingent from Vladivostok in 1920. So there's a half sentence about how we took our troops out of Vladivostok on April Fool's Day, it turned out, in 1920. Nothing at all about how we put them in. That's an example.
What was the origin of this book?
I taught for many years at Tougaloo College, a college in Mississippi that is predominantly African American. Then I moved to the University of Vermont, so I went from the blackest to the whitest college in America. When I was at Tougaloo, I was distraught by the fact that my students believed the following myth about Reconstruction. They believed that Reconstruction was that time period when blacks took over the government of the southern states right after the Civil War. But they were too soon out of slavery, and so they messed up, and whites had to take control again. Now, that's a terrible misstatement of what happened in Reconstruction. For one thing, the southern states were governed by a black-white coalition led by whites. They did not go under black control. For another thing, many of the southern states, particularly Mississippi, had good government during Reconstruction. In Mississippi, the state government during that time period started the public schools for both races, whites as well as blacks, wrote a terrific new constitution, and did other things. And I thought, what must it do to people to believe, erroneously, that the one time that they were on the center stage of history in the American past, they messed up? What does that do to your self-concept? So I looked into how had my students learned this? Why did they believe it? And Tougaloo was a good college, is a good college. They had learned what was in their high school state history books. So I put together a coalition of students and faculty, and we wrote a new history of Mississippi called Mississippi Conflict and Change. The state rejected it for public school use, and it's another story, but we actually took them to court about that and won a First Amendment victory. So then I moved to Vermont, and I realized that in this way, as in so many other ways, Mississippi was not exactly different from the United States as a whole. It was just an exaggeration. In other words, I got interested in American history, not just state history, and realized that it too suffers from tremendous distortions and omissions and even lies.
What's your reaction when you drive down the highway and you see historical marker ahead? And then
I stop.
And then you stop and you read it. How often do you believe it?
I haven't done a percentage, maybe half the time. It's a very important question because I call it lies on the landscape. I mean, we've got these historical markers all over the United States. The first problem with them is what isn't commemorated. I mean, all kinds of major events go unremarked because they're controversial or because they don't maybe show the United States in the best light. A recent one I drove past, in fact, I was situated near it for a week, is in upstate New York. And I was teaching on one of the Finger Lakes, teaching a bunch of history teachers, actually. And there's a marker there for General Sullivan's raid against the Iroquois during the American Revolution. And it's got some very interesting doublespeak in which the marauding Indians messed up the settlers, and therefore the army came in and punished the Indians and moved the frontier a couple of 100 miles west. Well, if you think about who's the settlers are actually the Iroquois. And in fact, part of what Sullivan did was burn their cornfields, destroy their orchards, and tear down their houses. They were settlers. These were not wandering people. These were not nomads. The marker could best be understood using a phrase from William Buckley, polemics, history as the polemics written by the victors.
You say in the back that you worked on this book for 11 years.
Yes.
Where?
At the University of Vermont. I spent 2 years also at the Smithsonian Institution. I'm possibly the only living American who has slogged through 12 high school history textbooks from cover to cover. And then besides that, I had to do a lot of research on the things I've just talked about, for instance, the putting of troops into the Soviet Union, so that I would make sure that I got the facts straight.
Back in the back flap, this is going to be a little bit difficult to do. We'll get a close-up of it. Are the 12 textbooks
yes.
that you wrote about? How did you choose these 12?
Well, for various reasons. I wanted to pick some of the bestsellers so that I would cover at least the textbooks that more than half of our students read. And there's one book in particular, it used to be called Rise of the American Nation. And after we lost the war in Vietnam, it got retitled Triumph of the American Nation. It has over a fourth of the market by itself. Publishers are leery of divulging sales figures. So it's a little hard to know after that one what's the bestseller, but I tried to include several of the very popular books. I also included 2 older books. These are called inquiry textbooks, and they were written during the 1970s. And they were a little different. The other 10 books we would call narrative textbooks. They just tell a straight chronology, and they tell it pretty much in the authorial voice, the kind of omnipresent, omniscient, godlike, here's what happened, and then here's what happened next. But the inquiry textbooks include more emphasis on primary sources, and then they ask students questions that hopefully get them thinking. These textbooks are no longer in print. The inquiry text movement didn't find favor with teachers, and it went out of existence.
Do people who write high school texts for history make a lot of money?
They do if they wrote Triumph of the American Nation. That is, if you get 1/4 of the market, that is a bonanza. And every textbook, it seems, and every publisher wants to have that book. And therefore, these books end up clones of each other. It surprises me. If you think about it, the city in which we are speaking, Washington, D.C., the school board is under black control. The same is true for Detroit, for New York City, for many other cities, and for some districts in Mississippi, for instance. But there is no black-oriented U.S. history. There's no U.S. history that, in fact, is what we might call multi-centric. I would say they are all Eurocentric. They are all clones of each other because each one wants to be the next Triumph of the American Nation.
How does a book start?
If you or I were going to write a history book, I think the first thing that Scott Forsman or Macmillan or whoever was engaging us would do is they would send us 5 or 6 competitors, and they would say, this is what you're up against. And I believe they would be saying also, make sure your book includes the stuff these books include. And the result of that is that the process is supposed to be one in which the textbook is based on the underlying secondary literature and history. There's a terrific secondary literature in history. It's what I read. It's what I based Lies My Teacher on. Lies My Teacher Told Me on. It is not a matter of you have to go back to the primary sources in every little detail. But the textbooks are not based on the huge secondary literature in history. They're based on each other. And thus they repeat some errors that go all the way back to the 1890s.
But is there anybody out there that kind of puts their imprimatur on textbooks that say, okay, this one's all right, that one isn't? And if they do that, who are they?
That's a good question. In one sense, no, there isn't. That is, you would think the history profession might, or there might be a review journal. Basically, history textbooks are not reviewed, at least high school textbooks. Even college textbooks are generally not reviewed.
By anybody?
By anybody. The history profession considers them a little bit dirty. That is, like, if I were a historian and I were applying for a new job at the University of Washington and I'm already at the University of Vermont, the fact that I might have written a history textbook would not count in my favor. If I'm looking for tenure, if I'm looking for advancement, they are looking, the deans and the history departments, they are looking for me to write a wonderful monograph on Andrew Jackson or whatever my wonderful monograph is about. They're not looking for a textbook. They consider them kind of dirty, kind of done for profit. At the University of Vermont, the former dean made a distinction between scholarship and what he called pedagogy. And textbooks would fit under that latter heading, and get very little credit. And the same holds even for the review journals. They're busy, they take their time writing reviews of monographs. They do not bother reviewing textbooks, particularly high school textbooks.
When was the first time you ever got interested in history?
I got interested in history as a result of being interested in sociology. In fact, I have to say that to me, good history is the sociology of the past. This will probably exercise some historians listening, but it seems to me that the important thing we want to know about the past is how did it shape us? What are the main things going on that caused us to be what we are like today? And going to Mississippi, which I did actually as an undergraduate for a semester, and then going back there as a faculty member.
Where were you in school when you went?
I was at Carleton College as an undergraduate. And
Minnesota?
In Minnesota. And I took my junior semester abroad, as it were. This was way back in 1963, and it was right after the Ole Miss riot. And I went to Mississippi State, which was then the largest all-white segregated institution of higher learning outside of South Africa. It did not have a single black student. In fact, the only black student in any white school in the state was one person, James Meredith, at Ole Miss. So that was a great time to go. It was a great time to see social change happening right before my eyes. And naturally, I got interested in the past.
How did you get to Carleton College in the first place? And how many African Americans were there at Carleton College?
When I went to Carleton College, I started in 1960. I applied from Illinois. It's not an unusual thing to do from the Midwest. I had good SAT scores and fairly good grades. And actually, I had some family involvement at the college, so I had known about it. I went to school with a person who was the 6th black student in the history of the college, and the college was 100 years old. Now, since then, Carleton has done a much better job. I understand the school is now 8 or 9% black, which is quite good for a college located in rural Minnesota. That meant, however, that when I was a junior, I had almost no experience with black people, particularly in college. Actually, I did to some extent in high school, which is another reason I wanted to go to Mississippi. I wanted to learn about a society that was different from the Midwest in which I grew up.
What was the town in the Midwest you grew up in?
Decatur, Illinois.
What did your parents do there?
My father was a doctor. My mother was a housewife and then also a junior high school librarian.
What kind of family was it? How many brothers and sisters?
One sister. We lived in the white part of town. We were Republicans and just pretty straightforward. But there was a strain of idealism in the family, maybe both my father and mother. And I think that got imparted to me. I hope it has. Because I think that there's a lot of idealism in American history, some of which I bring out in the book Lies My Teacher Told Me.
You dedicate this book to all American history teachers who teach against their textbooks. How come?
That's true. I think that's actually what needs to be done. If we think about textbooks, now this is a very interesting point. Just think about the titles of textbooks. In chemistry, A high school history chemistry textbook is likely to be called Chemistry, or Principles of Chemistry, or Introduction to Chemistry. The same is true in mathematics. The same is true even in English literature. But in history, very few books are called American History, or something bland like that. They're called Rise of the American Nation, Triumph of the American Nation, The Great Experiment, The Great Republic, Land of the Free. These are real titles. What is that saying? I think that's saying that we are not just entering another subject. We are not just going to learn about history. We are going to salute it. We're going to salute the flag. It's going to be an exercise in nationalism. I think that's wrong, because I think we develop stronger citizens and certainly more knowledgeable people, more knowledgeable about how we got where we are, if we teach history with all of its dirt and its glory, with all of its questions, with its good guys and its bad guys, instead of only good guys. So how can a history teacher deal with that? People often ask me, what book do you recommend? I don't recommend a book. I don't know a history textbook that treats history the way a chemistry textbook treats chemistry as something to be studied, worth learning about, period. So I think that a good teacher has to use a history textbook, but then maybe from reading Lies or from reading other works of secondary history, teach against that textbook. Get students thinking about it. Get students thinking about, why is the textbook leaving out this stuff? Why is it saying this when it's false, or this when it's not, when it's misleading?
This book is done by New Press?
Yes.
Who are they?
The New Press is a bunch of folks who were, as I understand it, thrown out of Pantheon when a millionaire named Newhouse took over Random House. And so for about the last 3 or 4 years, they have been a very interesting press. They get foundation grants. I think they call themselves a nonprofit commercial press, and they're the only such thing. A couple of their famous books are the book Race by Studs Terkel, and they also published the Supreme Court tapes that were caused a great controversy a year or two ago when the Supreme Court wasn't sure that they wanted their tapes published.
Peter Iron's book?
Yes, may it please the court.
I noticed that the cartoon on the cover is done by Jeff Danziger, who is also a Vermonter. Do you know him?
Not personally. He's actually illustrated a short story I wrote once, and so I know him professionally.
Where is the University of Vermont?
It's in Burlington.
And how did you decide to go there?
Well, at the time, when I decided to leave Tougaloo, there were several universities that were interested in me. The University of Vermont particularly appealed because it was setting up a PhD program in applied sociology, which is one of the things I do. This means sociology often used in court, and I'm an expert witness in civil rights cases particularly, but in other kinds of cases too. So they wanted me for that reason, and I wanted to go to a pioneering PhD program in applied sociology. After I got there, the next year there was a retrenchment, and the PhD program never went through. I enjoy the landscape. It's a beautiful town, and I'm there.
You say that, 4 out of 5 high school students who go to college do not take history courses?
I think the statistic is something like 83% of folks who graduate from high school never take another history course. That includes the folks who don't go to college at all, as well as those who go to college and don't take history.
You start the whole book out by saying that high school students hate history.
Yes. There's poll after poll that shows that history is the least liked subject, history and social studies and things like it. To my surprise, because I always had trouble with foreign language is much better liked than history. Mathematics often is the most liked subject. English, science, history always comes in last. I think there's some reasons for that. One is the incredible boring nature of the textbook. These textbooks average, I think, 888 pages. Probably every viewer will remember the incredible list of questions at the end of each chapter that you're supposed to memorize answers to. There's no way that you can learn. I counted them for one textbook and came up with over 2,000 questions. There's no way that you can remember at the end of a semester or at the end of the year these 2,000 plus factoids. And what you're not learning is the basic important questions and issues. So you don't have any skeleton to put all these little details onto. It's not a very liked subject. Anybody who's black or female or Asian American or whatever is going to feel alienated from it. But in my experience, affluent whites are just as alienated, or at least just as bored.
You talk about, and here's a picture we'll show of someone by the name of Helen Keller.
Yes.
Who was she?
Helen Keller is, of course, known to most of us as the famous blind and deaf girl who could, that is, who overcame. And I've asked hundreds of people, mostly my students, also other audiences, to tell me what she did with her life after she overcame. Exactly 2 people out of over 1,000 have known, and one of those learned it indirectly from me, and the other one is married to a deaf person. And in the deaf community, they do know what she did. But it's very ironic that although we get all these educational films about Helen Keller, there's something like a dozen of them on the market. And although almost every student gets some indoctrination as to this wonderful woman who did something, no one knows what she did once she learned how to read and write and speak.
What did she do?
Well, she became a radical socialist. She first became a member of the Massachusetts Socialist Party, and when that wasn't far enough left for her, she became a Wobbly, a member of the International Workers of the World, the IWW. And the reason she did this is actually related to her blindness, because she wanted to do something to help blind people, and she came to realize that blindness is not distributed amongst the social system just randomly. It's, particularly back then, maybe even today, it's concentrated in the lower class. That's because of industrial accidents that blinded people. It's because of syphilis carried by prostitutes who are mostly poor. And it's primarily, of course, due to bad medical care. So she realized that if she were just to spend the rest of her life working on the Braille alphabet, which she had done some work on improving, or doing other things like that, she was merely treating the symptom, not the cause. So she became a socialist. Well, I'm not here to push socialism, but it's very interesting that when she became a socialist, she was probably the most famous woman on the planet because of all the attention that had been given her when she learned how to speak, when she graduated from Radcliffe College, and so on. And suddenly, from the most famous, she became the most notorious. And all these newspapers that had lauded her now proceeded to distance themselves from her and say, well, of course, she's the captive of people around her. She doesn't really think independently, and so on. And she took them to task. She wrote letters to them saying, I blush to think how highly you spoke of me a couple of years ago. How stupid I must have become in the interim. And she wrote a letter to the Brooklyn Eagle, which was a very major newspaper. It was the newspaper that Walt Whitman had written for in the 19th century, that had been one of these newspapers that now attacked her. And she said, it is the Brooklyn Eagle that is socially blind and deaf. She says, I may not have been able to see the sweatshops and to see the factories or to hear them, but I have smelled them. And in fact, she did go on tours all across America. So she became really quite a humanitarian on behalf of decreasing social stratification.
You remember what year she died?
I think it was 1969 or so. She lived a long life and until quite recently.
If I understand it right, she is buried at National Cathedral.
Yes.
There, along with Annie Sullivan, her teacher.
I don't know about Annie, probably.
But the reason I mention it is she's also buried in the same place where Woodrow Wilson is buried, and you combine the two as you start off here. What do the two? Why'd you mention the two up front?
Well, my first chapter is about heroes and what textbooks do to heroes, and the two heroes I pick on are, in fact, Helen Keller and Woodrow Wilson, and both of them did some heroic things and deserve to be treated as heroes. Both of them also are talked about with amazing omissions. The omission about Helen Keller we've already discussed. Wilson, of course, issued his 14 points, attempted to argue for democracy at Versailles, also passed various things through the Congress during his progressive era as president. But Wilson had at least two shall we say, 2 feet of clay, maybe, two blemishes. One was his incredible racism. He was surely the most racist president since before the Civil War ended slavery. He was, of course, a white Southerner. And when he came to power, which was with the aid of considerable black votes who were trying the Democratic Party and trying its claims for progressivism, he proceeded to segregate Washington, D.C. He segregated the federal cafeterias, federal workplaces. If 2 people, one white and one black, had been sorting mail together, they now had to be in separate rooms or have a screen between them. He also stopped blacks from various political appointments that had been routinely given them since the days of Lincoln and Grant. And it's no coincidence that late in his term, the signals he was giving off about race relations penetrated the nation, and we had a wave of race riots from about 1917 through at least 1920. I mentioned in Lies My Teacher Told Me, possibly the first example of bombing civilians by aircraft, certainly the first example in United States history, came about in Tulsa.
Can we stop right here for a second?
When there was a race riot against the black community in Tulsa, and it even included flying a biplane, probably airplane.
So Woodrow Wilson, right? So we're talking about this time period. You know what I mean? 1900s, 1917, 1920, 21, 22. You know, this is whole transition after these people came into this country, 1870, 1880, 1890, by the millions. So they were working in sweatshops. Could you imagine? How about this? Imagine if this country allowed millions of Asian immigrants to come into this country, right? And flooded the workplaces. Or didn't have any room or skills or any, you know, now I think that shit, they would thrive in this country at this point. You know what I'm saying? But we'll get back to that. Point being is this is all the terrorism and all the things, the lynchings, the bombings and all the things that he's getting to happen at this time, but also the power shifting. We talk about, you know, he just said the Democratic Party, Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. So this is before Kennedy, you guys. So we talk about, oh, they love Kennedy. No, we talk about Woodrow Wilson. You know, people going along with the Woodrow Wilson. I mean, did they not know did they not know who he was, you know, before people got behind him and started voting for him? Because once again, even if they still let the millions of people into the country, we still outnumber them in the 1900s, you guys. Still had social, political. We're losing social, political, economic empowerment, but that didn't happen until the 1950s. So I just wanted to point that out, you know, just to bring some context. And this guy keeps talking about black, bliggity black, bliggity black, bliggity black, 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 black. That, once again, those are social constructs. So I just wanted to point that out. So just throw that in the trash. But it's interesting that he's not picking up on some of those things by using black, by using white, and putting them in time periods and stuff like that, or whatever. He's just perpetuating the system as well. Like, blow the whistle on. So let's go. I just want to point that out to you guys. Everybody, man, tap that. Appreciate that. Let's go. Let's go. Shout out to Shannon Porter, doing some research, studying herself right now. Suzanne Thompson in the building. DTG 034.
Through at least 1920.
Let's go.
I mentioned in Lies My Teacher Told Me, possibly the first example of bombing civilians by aircraft, certainly the first example in United States history, came about in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when there was a race riot against the black community in Tulsa, and it even included flying a biplane, probably airplane above the black community and dropping dynamite into it, killing more than 70 people. So these are race riots that actually far outdo the riots that we hear so much about in terms of the Rodney King riot in Los Angeles or the Watts riot.
Did you find any of this in any of the 12 textbooks you looked at?
Oh, there's a little mention of it. Some of the textbooks, let's say maybe 5 of them, will mention that Woodrow Wilson did some segregation, usually without an active verb. For instance, one textbook actually says that the federal government segregated, or workrooms in the federal government were segregated, and then Woodrow Wilson undid that. and called a halt to it. The second statement is just totally false. He never did that. He never called a halt to it. But there's a common practice of whenever anything bad is mentioned, it's put in the passive voice as if nobody did it. It just happened. The other problem with Woodrow Wilson, of course, was his invasion of the Soviet Union and of so many countries in Latin America. He put troops into Mexico a total of 13 different times, and also Nicaragua, Haiti, Dominican Republic. And some of the things that American soldiers ended up doing and some of the people they ended up supporting have come back to haunt us. From the dictatorship in Haiti, which we helped install, to the Trujillo dictatorship in the Dominican Republic, and so on. Now, I'm not trying to just badmouth Woodrow Wilson, but I am suggesting that we need to put him in perspective, that we need to be aware of the bad as well as the good. But somehow the textbooks have trouble with any wart, with any blemish on somebody who's supposed to be a hero.
Was this a tough book for your publisher with legal problems? Did they have a lot of lawyers have to go over this?
Not that I know of.
I mean, the things that you say about these 12 textbooks aren't of concern to the lawyers at New Press?
I don't think so. For one thing, unlike textbooks, this book is footnoted. So whenever there's whenever I'm asserting that this is how things really were, as opposed to this is what the textbooks say they were, I do provide documentation for that. Otherwise, I was generally quoting textbook authors and quoting what they said, and I think people can be quoted for held responsible.
Would you use any of the 12 books that you reviewed in any history course?
Yes. I would have them available as basically as backup. I personally wouldn't teach a high school history or even a college history textbook in a course because they cover so many things. There's no need to have 888 pages of all kinds of little details. I would rather focus on 10 or 12 major issues, chronologically arranged, that bring forth what the important points are that still have relevance to the present. But for teachers who do want to use a textbook, maybe they feel that they will get too much parental criticism if they don't. Or maybe they feel that there's all these little facts that their students are going to be asked on the SAT or on the New York Regents exam or something like that. Fine, I have no quarrel with using a textbook so long as the teacher helps the students learn against the textbook, put the textbook in perspective, critique the textbook for its omissions.
You have a picture in your book of a T-shirt that you can buy, you say, over at the Library of Congress that has 6 different faces of Columbus on it.
Yes.
What's the point?
The point is, incidentally, it's my son, Nick, is modeling that T-shirt. The point of those 6 pictures that the Library of Congress makes is we don't know what Columbus looked like. There's no known picture, for sure, that was painted of him while he was alive. The 6 pictures are very different, one from another. This gets then into the question, why does each textbook include a picture of Columbus, a head and shoulders picture? And I think it's for the purpose of iconography, not inquiry. Unless you believe we can read character from EyeSet, I think these head and shoulders pictures are pretty boring in the first place. But in the case of Columbus, we don't even know what his eyes look like, so we certainly aren't reading anything from it that's legitimate. So why include it? Because it's heroic, because it's an exercise in hero worship. That's the point I'm making by including it, and I think that's kind of why they sell the textbook and the T-shirt.
Thanksgiving Day.
A wonderful day. What about it?
Where does it stand in history?
Well, that's very interesting. A lot of people think, of course, that Thanksgiving goes back to 1620, to the Pilgrims, that we've had Thanksgiving Day ever since. I gave a whole talk for an hour at the Smithsonian about Thanksgiving a year and a half ago. The first point to know about Thanksgiving is that it was actually invented by Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War. And the first Thanksgiving that is in our modern series happened in 1863. And it was basically giving thanks for the slow victory of the troops, particularly that previous summer in Vicksburg and at Gettysburg, and the fact that the Union was going to be held together and that slavery was going to be ended. But it's maybe more interesting to go back to ask the question, what were the Pilgrims really thankful for? And this gets into the issue of the famous plague. But I shouldn't say the famous plague because almost nobody's ever heard of it. This is the plague of 1617 or 1618. Happened just 2 or 3 years before the Pilgrims set foot in Massachusetts. And it was a plague of enormous proportions. In fact, I used the perhaps unfortunate one-liner that it made the Black Death in Europe pale by comparison. The Black Death killed 1 out of every 3 Europeans over a period of 3 years. This plague in Massachusetts killed between 90 and 96% of all the people living there. Who were these people? These, of course, were Indian people. And so the Pilgrims were very aware of this. In fact, King James, the king who, of course, commissioned the King James Version of the Bible, he called it that wondrous plague among the salvages, because back then they spelled savages with an L. And various Pilgrim and Puritan leaders considered that this plague and some later plagues were sent by God to wipe out the Indians' title to this place and confer it onto the Pilgrims. And it's one of the reasons, therefore, most likely, that the Pilgrims ended up in Massachusetts rather than in Virginia, where they were thinking of going, or in Guyana, which they were actually contemplating. They get to Massachusetts, and what the students all know about it is that they had a tough winter, and then an Indian named Squanto comes along. And Squanto can speak English miraculously, and he helps them plant fish heads among the corn, and it grows tall, and the rest is all Thanksgiving. And what's ironic about that story is that Squanto himself provides a wonderful hook, a wonderful point of.
I mean, as you guys know, this guy is definitely pushing the narrative. Squanto spoke English in the 1600s. King James, all these people spoke English in the 1600s. Well, we know that's just not true. I don't know if he knows that's not true. Like, and I just don't know how much research he has done in 95. Y'all dig what I'm saying? So I have to give him that, but he is definitely pushing the narrative. You know what I mean? And it's just the overall narrative. But yeah, some mistakes and some things have happened and some omissions and things of the third, but it was still Great Britain. It was still King James. It was still this system. But he was talking about the plague that nobody heard of. I thought that was interesting. Just like the smallpox that killed how many millions of us that it killed? Is that, you know what I'm saying? And they don't have the bodies to scientific evidence of these millions. 90+ million people died of these plagues and smallpox. So I just want to point that out. So a lot of these things are just explaining away the paper genocide that has absolutely happened, and we know this. So at this point, so like I said, it's a lot of great value in this video right here. But like I said, I definitely wanted to point some things out. I don't want to forget it. So yeah. So shout out to this dude though. He's definitely going in. But you guys, we gotta take everything, and like I said, we examine everything. Everything is up for scrutiny. Let's go.
Entry to the whole plague story. The plague is one of the most important geopolitical events happening anywhere on the earth in the first quarter of the 1600s, because it means that nobody's going to oppose the British settlement of Massachusetts. In fact, the Indians are going to welcome it. And Squanto played the following role. He missed the plague. Why? Because he had been enslaved probably twice. Quite possibly taken once to England, spent several years there in the service of a rich man, who then finally sent him back to Massachusetts. Then he gets enslaved again in about 1617.
Wait, I thought that was the first time they came there. And they found somebody.
He escapes from slavery in Malaga.
English.
He escapes from Spain, makes his way to Britain, talks his way back to Massachusetts on a fishing boat. Actually, it took him 2 trips because the first boat only went to Newfoundland, and he thought maybe he could get a ride from Newfoundland to Massachusetts. Couldn't do it, went back to Britain. This man has been across the Atlantic 6 times. He's more traveled than any pilgrim. And yet what the textbooks say, one textbook, for instance, I quote, says, he had learned English, he explained, from passing British fishermen. Period. That's all they say. Well, I guess that's true, although they not only passed, they sold him into slavery in England and into Spain. Well, he missed the plague. He gets set back onto American soil. He walks to his home village only to make the unbelievable discovery that every person there is a corpse. And it's at this point that the Pilgrims come on the scene. He's a man without a tribe. His community is ended. That's why he throws in his lot with the Pilgrims. Now that's a story. That's a story with some drama. It's a lot better than this pious thing about planting the corn and planting the fish heads in the corn, and it grew tall. And he was then very important to the Pilgrims for the first 2 or 3 years until he did finally die of a different disease. The Pilgrims all knew this. For instance, there's one who writes in a diary, "In this bay where we now live, formerly dwelled 2,000 Indians, because they moved directly into the village with all the corpses. They moved into the village that Squanto's people had lived in. We named it Plymouth. The rest is history, as we say. But it isn't history because it keeps getting left out of our history textbooks."
You do an analysis of the number of pages devoted to the different decades.
Yes.
And you say the closer you get to the present, the less pages devoted in these history books.
That's true.
How come?
I think it's again because the recent past is controversial. You and I, for instance, might talk about the Vietnam War. We both remember it. We might, I hope, at least I do, we might talk about the women's movement. We might talk about the civil rights movement. And we're the age of parents. Parents have opinions about these things. They lived through it. And they don't all hold the same opinion. And therefore, there's some controversy going on. Now, it would be difficult, I suspect, for any group of parents to have an argument about the War of 1812. There are actually some controversial details and issues about the War of 1812. We could talk about them later, but they're not hot topics. They're not going to get history books rejected. I quote a Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston representative who says the following.
Who, by the way, who's Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston?
A major textbook publisher. I think they're now part of Harcourt Brace, and that's probably part of something else, and it's probably all ultimately owned by Newhouse. I don't know. Anyway, this representative said, if there's something controversial in a history book, better to take it out. Well, the recent past has the potential for being controversial. The Vietnam War is an interesting case in point. If you actually look at public opinion polls on the Vietnam War, you see that at this point, and for the last 10 years at least, 70% of the American people believe that the Vietnam War was neither politically correct nor morally correct. That is, it was a mistake for us to do it, and it was also morally wrong. That's at least 70%. Well, that's a whopping 70-30 majority. So that's not very controversial. But nonetheless, the textbooks leave out everything about the Vietnam War that has any guts to it, that has any controversy to it. The photos that they show, for instance. There are maybe half a dozen famous photographs of the Vietnam War. I've asked people who lived through that era to tell me what are these photos, and there's remarkable consensus. The photo of the naked girl having just been napalmed, I actually get emotional with this photo, running along Highway 1. The photo of the monk burning himself. I have only to cock my hand and people say, oh yes, that photo. They remember it. These are famous photos. They're still used in the news today. Even some of my students have seen it. The My Lai massacre photo, the famous photo of the evacuation from Saigon. These are the 5 that I concluded are the most important photographs of the war because they moved American public opinion. And they also show some of the issues of the war, such as the fact that the issue was that there were no front lines and that we were firing upon the civilian population.
And you include this photo. How come?
Because that's a typical photo that the textbooks do include. This is a photo of Lyndon Johnson surrounded by happy troops at Cam Ranh Bay, a naval base that we built in Vietnam. And it's a very different mood and a very less important image, an image that didn't move American public opinion, and it didn't really describe very much about the war in Vietnam. So I counted in all 12 books how many of the textbooks included any of these 5 famous photos. The result, 1 book included 1. 11 books included none of them. They just included photos like the LBJ photo.
Did you try to reach any of these 12 book authors and ask them?
Yes.
What did any of them talk to you?
Oh, yes. About the Vietnam issue. It's very interesting that you raised that question. Two authors, Davidson and Lytle, wrote two different American history books, I believe. Certainly they wrote one that is in my sample. They also wrote a very fine book called After the Fact. And After the Fact is aimed maybe primarily at at college history majors. And the title itself is a pun indicating that history is written after the fact afterwards, but also that historians go after the fact. And in After the Fact, they have a chapter on each of various issues in American history that they think deserve a lot of attention. They have a chapter, or most of a chapter, on the My Lai massacre. And they argue that the My Lai massacre is very, very important. They say it's important because, first of all, it influenced American public opinion. When these famous photos of the children and the old ladies and the old men lying in the ditch having been shot by American forces point blank, when those photos hit Life or Look magazine, I think it was Life, when the story of the massacre occurred, that moved American public opinion. And in fact, Davidson and Lytle argue that it influenced Hollywood, that we hardly ever see a movie about Vietnam that hasn't been influenced by My Lai imagery. So they're important. The second reason that they say they're important is because they claim, I think correctly so, that the My Lai massacre was not an isolated incident, that it was maybe an exaggerated incident, but nonetheless an exaggerated case of policies that happened a lot, that practices that happened a lot, that there were continued attacks on the civilian population of Vietnam. And I even quote William Westmoreland about that. He, of course, was the general in charge of the entire war from our side, saying, well, it does deny the enemy population, doesn't it? So it was an issue in Vietnam and an issue in terms of policy. So it's very important, they say. What do they do in their textbook? They don't mention My Lai. It doesn't occur in the index. It's not in the textbook. And they don't mention the type of anti-civilian act that My Lai symbolized. Now that's bad history. And in fact, when I was talking with them, I complimented their wonderful book After the Fact, and I asked them, what about their textbook? And Mr. Lytle was speaking with me, and he said, well, I call my textbook a McDonald's version of history. And I asked him, what does that mean? And he said, well, it means it's bland. If it had any flavor, it wouldn't sell.
Why?
He believes, and his publishers believe, obviously, that if it had any flavor, anything interesting in it, then it would upset some people. And that the way to sell the textbook is to make it as bland as possible, as uncontroversial as possible.
Do you know, in fact, that then all of the teachers that use these textbooks do not teach a lot more of Vietnam? I noticed that you have a statistic in here that says the average teacher spends between 0 and 4.5 minutes a year teaching Vietnam. How do you know that?
Well, that was, I footnote that. That's research done by someone else who did study it, at least in the state of Massachusetts, where he was from. I suspect that it's true. I've talked with a lot of students, hundreds actually, because I asked my introductory sociology students about their experience with American history, and I've asked many of them whether they ever got to Vietnam. And I know when I took history, of course, the Vietnam War had not happened, but we didn't even get to the Second World War, or we got just to the end of it. And I did take history after the Korean War and after lots of other things happened. What happens is these books are daunting, and teachers just don't reach the end of it. In fact, one famous example, there's the book, I think there's a book called Teacher. Anyway, it's a big bestseller of a couple of years ago, in which the author followed a teacher in Holyoke, Massachusetts, as she went through the school year. And by the end of the year, she had just gotten to Reconstruction. She was still back in 1866 or so. Well, such a teacher obviously is not going to teach about the war in Vietnam.
You say that the Disney World has a presentation, a 29-minute presentation, history of the United States, in which it completely leaves out Vietnam, the ghetto riots of the 60s and the 90s. Did you ask anybody why that's the case?
No, I didn't talk with anybody yet.
Why did you point it out? What was the reason?
Well, I would think it's a reasonable description of Disney history. I remember also another example of Disney history. I went to the New York World's Fair of 1964 or whenever it was, something like that. And they had an animated version of like a three-dimensional sculpture of Abraham Lincoln that walked and talked and said stuff. And he spoke for 3 or 4 minutes without ever mentioning slavery. So we're in the amazing situation that we don't remember the Vietnam War. We don't remember slavery as an issue even connected with Abraham Lincoln. And this is what I call feel-good history. Somebody else might call it Disneyland or Disney World history. I think that there must be some belief on the part of someone in the publishing houses or in the textbook adoption boards that the way to promote strong citizens is by lying to them, by giving them this feel-good history that just tells them that the United States is the best country has ever been and we never did anything wrong. I don't hold that belief. I think the way to develop strong citizens is to get them involved in the issues of history and see that there have been Americans who have argued for positive, wonderful, just principles and are remembered around the world. And there have been Americans that have argued for oppressive principles and are remembered around the world for that. And sometimes even the same Americans have argued on both sides. And that, I think, would get students involved with the issues of history rather than just kind of rote patriotism.
You quote from The Challenge of Freedom, which is one of the history books, the following thing. President Kennedy and his administration responded to the call for racial equality. In June 1963, the president asked for congressional action on far-reaching equal rights laws. Why did you quote that?
The textbooks, again, want to heroize everybody, and the number one hero becomes the federal government. Well, if, as I mentioned earlier, if they can't have a blemish, then when they talk about the federal government as the hero, they can't have a blemish in their treatment of the federal government. This is very unusual because after Watergate and after Iran-Contra-Gate and all of our other scandals of the late 60s and 70s and even into the 80s and 90s, I think the American people have grown rightly suspicious or at least thoughtful about the federal government and don't just think that it always does the right thing. Our textbooks still present it as the be-all and end-all and the do-gooder of everything. Now, I participated in the civil rights movement. I've mentioned that I was in Mississippi. And there was a poster that the movement offices had up on their walls during the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer. And that poster said, there's a street in Itta Bena called Freedom. There's a town in Mississippi called Liberty. There's a department in Washington called Justice. Now that's a bitter poster because, of course, there was very little freedom in the little delta town of Itta Bena. There was very little liberty in the nasty Mississippi town of Liberty. And they were arguing, therefore, there's very little justice coming out of Washington. And during the Kennedy administration, the main response of the federal government was made, in fact, by the FBI. Now, what did the FBI actually do with regard to the civil rights movement? Well, first of all, we have to realize that the FBI didn't have an office in Mississippi and didn't have very many offices in the South at all. When it did, those offices were all staffed by white Southerners. The FBI at this time had not a single black officer. Hoover claimed it did because he counted his 2 chauffeurs. They were black, but that was it. But beyond that, the FBI claimed that it was not its job to protect or even to investigate threats of violence that came to civil rights workers. And again, beyond that, J. Edgar Hoover made it his policy. He thought that the Brown versus Board of Education decision was wrong and outlandish, and he made it his policy to investigate civil rights movement people. So as we know, he tapped King's phone, he tapped the hotel rooms that civil rights movement organizers operated out of or met in. He made well, not he, but FBI agents made a tape of King's phone calls and conversations in his room, often having to do with sex, and sent it to Coretta Scott King, hoping to persuade King to commit suicide. Now, this is a documented fact. Again, I'm not inventing this fact. I'm just citing the professional literature in history. That's why there's not going to be lawsuits against the New Press because of this. So that's the kind of role that the federal government played with regard to the civil rights. That's part of its role with regard to the civil rights movement. And Kennedy himself, even a very thoroughgoing Kennedy supporter like Arthur Schlesinger writes something like, in the area of civil rights, did not bring out the best of the Kennedy presidency, or something like that. My own college, Tougaloo College, was investigated by the FBI as a threat to America because it was in favor of civil rights. What's the result of all this? Well, a lot of bitterness on the part of the civil rights movement. But what do the textbooks say? They say that the federal government did the civil rights. That is, that it passed the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, the 1965 Voting Rights Bill, and so on, that it just kind of did it. This has a terrible payoff for the present, I think. To my surprise, I've had a lot of conversations in the last year with young African Americans, and a lot of black people these days think that integration actually is wrong, and they look back with nostalgia to the days of segregation and separate black schools. These are people who generally were not born in that era, and they don't realize what a terrible era this was. But the textbooks play right into their hands, because the textbooks have the entire integration movement as being done by the federal government, when actually the integration movement was done by mostly black private citizens who risked their lives to get the federal government to enforce the civil rights laws dating back to Reconstruction. So there's kind of room, therefore, for a paranoia that the textbooks feed by telling the black community, and for that matter, the white community, that the federal government has always done things for black people. Blacks become paranoid. What are these things? Are they a good idea? And I think it encourages whites to become racist and say, well, if the federal government has always been doing these wonderful things for black folks, haven't we done enough? Why do we need to do more? What's the problem?
How would you describe your own politics?
Oh, very mixed. In the last 5 years, I have voted for Republicans, Democrats, and we have also in Vermont a socialist or progressive, he's called, congressperson, the only non-Republican, non-Democrat in the Congress. And at the risk of invading the sanctity of the ballot booth, I have to admit that I voted for him on occasions.
Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Where do you live?
In South Burlington, Vermont.
How big is the university?
About 10,000, 11,000.
And how many courses a semester do you teach?
Five a year. 2 some semesters, 3 the next.
What kind? What are the names of them?
I mostly teach sociology. I'm not in a department of history. I like to teach race relations, and I teach it almost every semester. It's a searing experience. I mean, some of my black students get angry with me. Some of my white students get angry with me for various reasons. And so you have to develop a thick skin to teach race relations, even in a place that might seemingly be as removed from the issues as Vermont.
What's the percentage of students at the University of Vermont that are African American?
Well, I had her in class last semester. To be serious, we have done a terrible job of recruiting African American students. When I first went there were 75 black students. That's out of approximately 10,000. Now you might say, well, what's the matter with that? Because Vermont's so white, and Vermont is the whitest state. But we recruit over half of our students from out of state, and not only from out of state, but from metropolitan areas, including this one, and including New York and Philadelphia. But when we have recruited in Washington, we typically recruit from Bethesda or from the suburbs of Philadelphia. Not so much when I got there, when we had 75. We then had an admissions director who cared and who was making efforts to increase that percentage. But he left, and the person who followed him, who is thankfully now gone, didn't care about this issue, and we actually fell down to something like 28 black students. I think now we're back up to 50. In other words, it's a minuscule percentage.
In the acknowledgments in the front of the book, you say the people listed below in alphabetical order talked with me, commented on chapters, suggested sources, corrected my mistakes, provided moral support. I just want to go over some of them. Lucy Lowen.
That's my daughter.
How old is she?
She's now 22. She and my son, Nick Lowen, who's also listed there, did read chapters, and I also had them doing some fact-finding for me.
What's your son do, Nick?
Right now he works in a delicatessen in San Francisco. He's been accepted into the Peace Corps and hopes to go to Guinea in West Africa.
You list Frances Fitzgerald. Mm-hmm. Who is Frances Fitzgerald?
She wrote possibly the most direct predecessor to my book. a rather famous book called America Revised. That came out, I think, in 1979, and that was a hard-hitting study of history textbooks also that first got serialized in the New Yorker and then was a bestseller. Her book is different from mine in that she mostly looks at the form of textbooks and how the form has changed over time. And she decries the fact that, for instance, instead of telling a story, they now interrupt it with all kinds of blobs of pictures and little boxes with special things. She doesn't get as far into the facts of, for instance, the plague and the pilgrims and so on, and decry what they are saying. It's not so much a content book as it is a form book.
Richard Current, James McPherson, Roger Kennedy, and is John Hope Franklin?
No, John Franklin is John Hope Franklin's son, who works at the Smithsonian. But the first three you named are major historians, and they either responded to my pleas for help on specific points, or they read chapters and commented on them, or both.
Anybody upset with you?
I hope so. I certainly hope that publishers will be upset with me. Not personally, but I hope that they will realize that it just doesn't do to attempt to write non-controversial, boring history. There may be a couple of other groups that are upset with me. For instance, Mel Gabler is a textbook critic in Texas. And for the last 20 or 30 years, he and his wife and an organization that he started have greatly influenced textbook adoption because Texas is an adoption state. Now, I mentioned that about half the states are adoption states. Texas is the biggest one. Publishers don't want to lose that market. Vermont has no influence over textbooks. States that don't adopt statewide have no influence over textbooks because they have 500 or 200 or whatever school boards and school districts that are adopting district-wide, or sometimes even different principals or different high schools are adopting just high school-wide. So that's not going to sway a publisher. But Texas, I think Texas has just passed New York to become our second most populous state. It's certainly up there anyway. And so Gabler used to be able to really influence the state textbook board in Texas to throw out textbooks that had a different point of view than his, and his was a pretty right-wing point of view. But he also did a really good public service. He also pointed out all kinds of little bitty factual errors that publishers made and are still making. Most famous recently was about a year or two ago, I think it was people connected with Gabler, found a textbook that actually claimed that the Korean War was ended when Truman decided to drop the atomic bomb. Now, Truman wasn't even in office when the Korean War was ended. And of course, the bomb that was dropped on Japan a decade earlier. That's a pretty horrible mistake to make. So I share with Mr. Gabler the idea that we need to critique these textbooks, but I think he and I critique them from rather different viewpoints. He may be upset with me.
Speaking of that, didn't you cite that something like 22% of the students and you surveyed thought the Vietnam War was between North and South Korea?
Yes. Isn't that a killer? I thought that I'd given out the answer. When you say, who fought in the War of Vietnam, and 22% say North and South Korea.
Did they tell you why they thought that?
No. Well, I don't remember. I don't remember that. I mean, the question in that case was just a little blank, and I didn't ask a why question, so I didn't get it in writing. We did discuss it, and when we discussed the why, what came up was, well, we never got to that in history. Back to the issue of what is taught about the war in Vietnam. Nothing is taught about it. So my students ended up knowing a lot more about the War of 1812 than about the war in Vietnam.
James Lowen is our guest, and this is what the cover looks like. Lies My Teacher Told Me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There you guys have it. Shout out to Gretchen in the building. Running back games. DJ ZPE. Garfield Rule. Falling Lightning. That piece of the guys, man. The Chosen One. Bronze Flat Power God. Mr. C. Appreciate you guys, man. Tap in. Shamel Thomas. Peace to the guys, man. Appreciate everybody tapped in. We'll get into this. Let's get into a couple songs real fast. Then we'll come back. We can rap about this a little bit. Now I'm gonna get into the myths that made America. We'll get into debunking this founding father stuff. Kind of get a little baseline of what this dude was talking about. Kind of went over it. It's interesting. I mean, does he not know about the agenda? You know what I mean? It's like, once again, it's like if somebody's going to expose something, okay, well, expose the whole thing. Okay, there's this system, caste system. When you're using black in that caste system, he knows about this stuff. And it's just kind of interesting, that he's not saying anything. But also, something else that was interesting that what he was talking about. He was talking about, the civil rights era and stuff like that or whatever. They had these guys like him and Bernie Sanders type guys or whatever involved, air quote, in the civil rights era. You know what I mean? It's really weird, man. So, Job Bricks, man. Miss my dogs. Let's go.
Two deadly shootings in Newark in less than 2 days. The latest happening last night at a barber shop. In both cases, officers have not yet made any arrests. Eyewitness News reporter Derek Waller, live in Newark as the community grows restless.
K-Dub. I miss my homies, yeah, I miss my dog. Street so fucking crazy, don't get too involved, yeah. Said don't get too involved, yeah. Hey, damn, I miss my homies, yeah, I miss my dog. Street so fucking crazy, don't get too involved. For all my dead homies, yeah, I gotta ball. It's time to break these chains, it's time to free us all. Damn, I miss my homies, yeah, I miss my dog. Street so fucking crazy, don't get too involved. For all my dead homies, yeah, I gotta ball. It's time to break these chains, it's time to free us all. Let's take all these chains cause we innocent. All our resources is limited. Whatever they start, I'ma finish it. I'm young and I'm black and I'm militant. We young and we strapped, we don't give a shit. Better get back on pilling it. The cops been a block, I'm concealing it. But if that's the option, revealing it. Break city, that's a war zone. Same city that I call home. If you ain't fight, come home. Be ready to rock when you called on. I studied the rock, got my ball on. A shot from the side, got my ball on. If I fall off, I'ma fall on. I'm a ball even if I'm a walk on. But it ain't a sprint, it's a marathon. Find me a wife I can marry on. Find me some kids I could carry on. A legacy I could carry on. Got some niggas in the chain gang. Youngins, all they know is gang bang. But we ain't here to play the blame game, cause the main thing is to maintain. And we gon' do that from the rip. I don't care if you a blood or a crip. Real niggas won't cease to exist, cause if you black, my nigga, you the shit. And damn, I miss my homies, yeah, I want them bad. Some of them in the system, some ain't coming back. Damn, I miss my homies, yeah, I miss my dog. Streets so fucking crazy, don't get too involved. For all my dead homies, yeah, I gotta roll. It's time to break these chains, it's time to free us all. Damn, I miss my homies, yeah, I miss my dog. Streets so fucking crazy, don't get too involved. For all my dead homies, yeah, I gotta roll. It's time to break these chains, it's time to free us all.
Take off them chains, we innocent. And stop with them honey sentences. We young and our talent is limitless. They know it, so they tryna cripple us. They love when we're in the military, but they hate us for being militant. It scares them, they want us feminine. But fuck their opinions, no giving in. Cause I can never dream big again. Cause I will never see Twiz in them. And I will never get Kwani back. It's like my life keep on rewinding back. And every time that I close my eyes and I try to dream, I only see my guys. Sit there and I talk to them and I tell them I'ma keep them alive. Wake up now, nigga motivated, had to move on and I know they hate it. But me and death, we associated and I refuse to be guilty by association. Money low, but my voice I raised it. Knowledge for the poor in them poor locations. Mix pain music with motivation. I'm just helping young niggas cope with hating. Cause damn, I miss my homies, Twakwani and Tweak, Moo Reek, Ab B, Scooter and Breeze, Mike Sa, Shira Case and Za, and a bunch of other niggas that I lost to the block. It's
Hey, damn, I miss my homies, yeah, I miss my dog. Streets so fucking crazy, don't get too involved. For all my dead homies, yeah, I gotta roll. It's time to break these chains, it's time to free us all. Damn, I miss my homies, yeah, I miss my dog. Streets so fucking crazy, don't get too involved. For all my dead homies, yeah, I gotta roll. It's time to break these chains, it's time to free us all.
What you see me do? I be moving so fast, you ain't see me move. I get money, I stay dripping, what you see me do? I hit the club, fuck with bitches, what you see me do? Look at me, then look at you. You know she leaving with me, don't care who leave with you. I get money out these trenches, what you see me do? Diamond necklace, water dripping, what you seen it do? They tryna see me move. I'm in these streets running it up. I got my tennis shoes. A different pair every time I move. Bitch, I got plenty shoes. I keep a gun in all my cars. Bitch, I got plenty too. Don't keep no gun inside my car that I'm not finna use. Just told old boy better get his broad cause your hoe finna choose. You play with me, boy, you gon' get scars cause I'm not finna lose. Got a big AR and a bit shoot far like I'm shooting for the moon.
Hey, not a Pokemon, I don't pick or choose. No, I just let these cute yellow things pick or choose. Take her to Saks Fifth, tell her pick a shoe. Pretty penny for them Jimmies, tell her pick a choose. Cause it ain't hard for me to pull a hoe with dirty clothes on and a booger nose. But I'm the clap doctor out the washer, bitch, that clean. Salamander, Alexander, Mac Queen. $1,000 shirt, bitch, with the chrome hearts. Smoking on certs, smelling like some strong farts. Yeah. Liquid THC, Genie put them on carts. We be killing every beat, don't put them on charts.
Yeah. Put us on charts with the flow. Bad yellow bitch, I'm a dig on the splits, but I really ain't even trying to start with the hoe. Big 4-5, I'm a hit when it's spit, I hit you, I leave your ass parked on the floor. Big blunt lit, take a hit when it's lit, one hit, lift your ass out the park with the dro. Diamonds on my neck and my wrist stay lit in the sun if you turn off the lights to the glow. I came right in the door, cut knee nigga like a knife in the throat. Fuck a bitch down, ain't wife in the hoe, but I might keep around cause I like the little hoe. It's cold outside, I'ma take my chain off, throw it on the ground, let it blend right with the snow.
Made a Facebook post about the best head in the city and they said that your wife is the GOAT. There's 25 bitches in the comments saying that I'm lying. Them hoe about to fight in the post. Freestyle, nigga really coming straight out the mind. Ain't no need for me right in the flow. I'm the light in the hoe. Crackheads think about me every time that they light in the dough. She ain't got enough money, I ain't liking the hoe. Got 2 new bitches, yeah, dyke in the hoe. I'ma hit it from the back with a rope around the neck. Every time the bitch run, I'ma tighten the rope. Throw a butt naked birthday party overseas off in Italy. Fuck it, I'm inviting the Pope. In that bitch Kamala Harris. I'ma stick my dick right in her throat.
What you see me do? I be moving so fast, you ain't see me move. I get money, I stay dripping, what you see me do? I hit the club, fuck with bitches, what you see me do? Look at me, then look at you. You know she leaving with me, don't care who leave with you. I get money out these trenches, what you see me do? Diamond necklace, water dripping, what you seen it do?
Yeah, man. Shout out to CNO Sport. What we got in here, man? Shout out to everybody, man. Tapped in. So, yeah, let's just get right into this this book. Yo, man. I mean, this what the shit that we're doing is as unraveling. You know, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of narratives. I mean, it's really interesting, you know, that they how they say enslavement and slavery, because they know, you know what I'm saying, like who the actual slaves are first and foremost. Let's just start there. You know what I'm saying? Second off, right? That's just let's just keep it simple, right? But they also know when they're talking about enslavement, what that means. You know what I'm saying? The whole Squanto story. I mean, come on, y'all. Like it's extra crazy. You know, the first time they come and then they meet somebody. So then that means either he went there or somebody else came there first and took him to England and all this other stuff. So then when they even tell the stories, it just sounds just crazy. But the guy that's doing the fact checking, even in 1995, should have caught that, especially a teacher, you know what I'm saying, who knows in 95, just not even 10 years before, they're pushing certain narratives like African American. So he's pushing the whole African American thing. Well, he knows when that got transitioned to African American, especially if he's been teaching, you know what I'm saying, in school. So that leads me to believe that he is a part of it. It's kind of like, you controlled opposition. I don't even know if it's controlled opposition. Like, you know, if it's gonna be somebody that will be observing our people, once again, you know, teaching our history and things of that nature, whatever, pushing African American, pushing Black, pushing certain narratives or whatever. You know, these will be these type of guys or whatever. But then we turn around and be like, yo, we got to hear it from somebody like this. And I just think that's really interesting, especially coming from Black Power Rangers. You know what I mean? Who said they want some power or whatever, you know, and they have to get validation from other people who have another book or somebody else that looks like them, and ultimately leads to these royal societies and these groups that were set up in the late 1800s, you know, and going into the 1900s. Also, what I thought was interesting, you know, these setting up these universities, you know, in the South. And that's kind of what Dr. Martin Luther King was talking about in the late 60s, you know what I'm saying, when he was talking about giving them land grants. Then we talk about these GI Bills, these things to go to school, but they was going to course, they were going to agricultural schools, Texas A&M. Y'all understand what I'm saying? So agriculture and mechanics. So with the land grants, and land is power. Land is still power to this day. Land is wealth to this day. And so, so even when we talk about the Millers, you guys get to see the Millers, man. So that was crazy. We definitely gonna have to figure that out to be able to do that. That might have to. I don't know what we're gonna do with that, you guys. I'm gonna do that on a private build or something. But it was just crazy. Even though they bought this house, you know what I'm saying, and 10 acres that came with the house for a decent little price, you know what I mean? It ultimately used to be their land and their house, it still was like 1,300 farm acres, you know what I'm saying, farmland that was still owned by the European family that came there, and got it after them, some type of way. And we know a lot of these things that happened was based off of taxations and illegal taxations, illegal regulations, you know what I'm saying, through the banking system. So a lot of stuff happened after Woodrow Wilson, you know what I'm saying? But definitely, you know what I'm saying, we're talking about how do we allow these type of people to get into office? How did this happen? You know what I'm saying? So I think there's some things that we're going to have to really figure out. Support the real, you guys. Let's go. We're about to get into this thing, man. All right, so this comes from Myths That Made America. Hinky, we'll get to the author in a minute, you guys. What's interesting about the author? The author is German, and is teaching over in a German university. This book was written in 2013 or 14. Can't remember the hip. We'll get back to that in a second. Let's get to this. So this is chapter 4. 7 chapters in this book, by the way. So we want to get into this one. We're talking about the founding fathers, right? So it says, so American independence and the myth of the founding fathers. It says, 1, why the founding fathers? Who fathered America? Tim LaHaye, father of our founding fathers. Okay, it says, when in doubt in American politics, left, right, or center, deploy the founding fathers. It says Jill LaFleur, the whites of their eyes. Okay, so that's those 2 books that they're referencing, right? Let's go. Let's scroll down. It says the myth of the founding fathers constitutes an American master narrative which has enshrined a group of statesmen and politicians of the revolutionary and post-revolutionary period as personifications of the origins of American nationhood. Okay, thank you. Republicanism and democratic culture, right? Says more so than with previously discussed individuals and groups, the founding fathers epitomize a political myth of origin that is phrased in a language of kinship. The term, quote, fathers suggests tradition, legitimacy, and paternity, and creates an allegory of family and infiltration that affirms the union and the cohesion of the new nation. When the colonists, I'm going to switch that, when the refugees in the revolutionary decade argued that they were no longer subjects of the British king and that they could now govern themselves. Right? Now, I think it's interesting. So they, once again, they pushed this whole narrative of this British king, like they had jurisdiction here in America over us. And you know what I mean? So they, once again, we're going to fact check the fact checkers. Okay? We're going to fact check these people who are still, what, I don't give a fuck who you are. You know what I'm saying? So when you're pushing certain things, is words matter when you write them down. Okay? Words matter. So I just want to say that. So I'm changing words. So what? Let's go. It says, claim not only the maturity of the colonies, right, the refugees, and its ruling elite, that also their capacity to produce progenitors in their own right, right? Right? You know how they be like George Washington has all these progeny that was his slaves, right, that carry his name and bloodline and all this other stuff. Same thing with Thomas Jefferson. It's always these things, and we're gonna get back to that. But it's always these things, how they just push these narratives. You know what I mean? And they even push these as if these surnames come from there to here, as if their bloodline comes from there to here. You know what I mean? So they kind of push these ideas on us, and we believe them, and I think that's really a problem. It says the construction of, quote, the new world, right, authority and the logic of reproduction went hand in hand. Second, in contrast to the myths previously discussed, which date back to the era of exploration and I don't believe in colonization, you guys, anymore. The chronology of the chronology of the founding fathers coincides with the actual founding of the nation, beginning roughly with Benjamin Franklin's birth in 1706 and ending with James Madison's death 1836. As a myth, founding fatherhood would only be installed firmly much later, through arguably only in the 20th century. As we will see, the founding fathers denote a secular myth that in its hegemonic, that's what I guess we're gonna go call that. Hegemonic version claims that the US evolved from the Puritans' Mayflower Compact to the political maturity of republicanism. It also constitutes a myth of a new beginning effected through a revolution, right? This whole war thing, this Revolutionary War, and we got freedom from Great Britain and all this stuff. Who are you talking about, right? Even though this revolution has been interpreted in many different ways, it certainly carries that specific pathos of the absolutely new of the beginning, which would justify starting to count time in the year of the revolutionary event. End quote, right? I tell you that art on the revolution, page 29 through 30, right? In many ways, the American calendar, right, begins with the Declaration of Independence in 1776. That's what they say, right? 1776. And the Revolutionary War. And this new beginning is commemorated each year on the 4th of July. Yesterday or day before yesterday, now, right? Says the myth of the founding fathers is also intimately connected to the first explicit articulations of the American civil religion. In his farewell address to the 1796, in his farewell address of 1796, George Washington refers to the bounds among the U.S. states as, quote, sacred ties to be preserved and cherished on the basis of the Constitution, and thus translates the European religious idiom of the, quote, Holy Union into a civil religious framework that would be particularly influential in constructions of the American nation, right? C.F. Spalding and Garrity's Sacred Union. Third, the myth of the founding fathers, like that of the Pilgrims and Puritans, focuses on a group of historical actors. These niggas is crisis actors. It symbolizes cooperation and independence by toning down internal conflicts among those actors and by erasing, what is that? Interdependence, my bad. By interdependence by toning down internal conflicts among those actors and by erasing the contingency of their plans and actions, their local and regional rather than national interests, and all sorts of major and minor disagreements. Even though members of this group have been heroized individually, George Washington above all, they still form a collectively whose military, political, intellectual, and diplomatic talents and efforts have led it to perform what has been inferred to in hegemonic versions of the myth as nothing less than, quote, a miracle. What's that? Shatner, Founding Fathers, right? It says, or almost, quote, almost a miracle. See, Furling's book of the same title. It also strongly personifies the origins of American nationhood, republicanism, and democracy by presenting them as the results of the political genius, virtue, and audacity of extraordinary individuals. The myth has been affirmed by American and European writers, critics, and scholars alike, ranging from Richard Hofstadter to Clinton Rossiter, and from Alexis D. Tocqueville to Hannah Arendt, who exactly is or is not to be included among the founding fathers is a matter of scholarly debate, as this term has only been applied retrospectively and inconsistently, right? Technically, the founding fathers were delegates of the 13 colonies, wrong, who signed the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, and later the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Some of those 164 patriots, right, as Jack Stanfield calls them, CF, Americans' founding fathers, are little known today, while others figure predominantly in memorial discourses, right? Richard Brown looks at the quote 99 men that the 99 men, the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the members of the Constitutional Convention, between whom exists some overlap, right? And identifies the founding fathers as the uppermost layer of the revolutionary leadership, right? Founding fathers. 465, and that's Richard Bernstein's, even more inclusively describe the founding fathers as those who those who by word or deed helped to found the United States as a nation and political experiment. Thus, beyond the quote 7 who shaped our destiny, named by Richard B. Morris, the term includes those who sat in the Congress that declared American independence. It even includes a delegate such as John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, who opposed independence and refused to sign the Declaration, but fought for the American cause in the Revolutionary War. And a polemist such as Thomas Paine, who only briefly held political office but was an extraordinarily effective educator and mobilizer of public opinion. It also encompasses others who fought on the American side in the war or played important roles as farmers, ratifiers, opponents, or can't even see that, effectuators. Somebody's great at effecting things, right? In the origins of the Constitution of the United States and the system of government it outlines, right? Founding fathers in the 7 through 8. Okay, it says Gore Vidal, in contrast, singles out Washington, Adams, and Jefferson as the founding fathers of the American Republic, even though he refers to Alexander Hamilton as one of the three aforementioned figures, and quite frequently also to John Jay and James Madison, CF, inventing, keyword inventing. As Bernstein's reference to Morris's 1976 book, 7 Who Shaped Our Destiny, in the above quotation shows the epithet, quote, founding fathers often refers to the 7 individuals, namely Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and James Madison. It is by and around these quite iconic figures that the founding fathers myth of origin has been predominantly constructed, even if there are other suggestions and additions such as Harlow, Giles, Unger's rather laudatory appraisal of James Monroe as the last founding father, 2009, right? So whether there were 3, 7, 9, 99, or 164 founding fathers, and some accounts come up with still other numbers, it's contentious. And and has been subject to processes of canonization and revision time and again. Now we talk about them burning down the Library of Congress, courthouses, the National Archives. So when people are pushing certain information today, you know what I'm saying, they use these things as absolute, right? No, these are references that should be also cross-referenced. Okay. And it takes other curriculums other than just reading this shit right here. You know what I'm saying? One thing I agree with dude that said earlier, there's not a book written they agree with. There's nothing. We notice that this all the time. There's not nothing. There's no book written nowhere. Not yet. But there's no book written nowhere. I don't care what you say. While we may refer to the American elite of the late 18th century as founding fathers, ultimately, farmers, founders, and while the group later referred to as the founding fathers was already commemorated in early American popular print culture, the phrase founding fathers as a label became a fixed expression only in the early 20th century. Early 1900s is when they started to come in and started to gain power economically, but also in the newspaper. I mean, it's not when they started, but definitely started to take not only social, political, definitely economic empowerment in the early 20th century, right? After it was used for the first time in 1906 by Warren G. Harding in a talk at the Republican National Convention. C.F. Bernstein, founding fathers, this is page 3. C.F. also the poor, and that's whites. Harding again used this phrase in his 1921 inaugural address. Okay, it says, standing in this presence, mindful of the solemnity of this occasion, feeling the emotions which no one may know until he senses the great weight of responsibility for himself. I must utter my belief in the divine inspiration of the founding fathers. Surely there must have been God's intent in the making of this new world republic. Harding's speech may well be considered a founding moment of the founding fathers' discourse, even though group portraits and images of those American politicians and statesmen had, of course, been circulating much earlier. It's gonna be interesting, guys, when you guys see what they look like. Hear about what they look like. It's really interesting. Says, my aim in this chapter is neither to provide a full-fledged discussion of the merits of the American republicanism and constitutionalism as debated and created by the founding fathers, nor to present in-depth analysis of the foundational documents, nor to address each of the founding fathers as private and public figures, but rather to reconstruct the processes through which the myth of the founding fathers developed. In this chapter, I will first revisit the historical moment of the American founding, right? Second, trace the affirmative, i.e. foundational memorial culture surrounding the founders in the 19th century. Third, consider American slavery in the context of the founding fathers' myth by the role of Abraham Lincoln as the related founding father, or more specifically, as the founding father for African Americans. Fourth, addressed the long neglected role women played as founding mothers in the metaphorical paradigm of procreation. Fifth, direct our attention to the memorial practices of the 20th century, more specifically to the founding fathers of Mount Rushmore, a prestigious and very controversial project that, among other things, shed light on Native American perspectives on the founders. Six, discuss the latest revisions of the founding fathers myth in the context of the Tea Party movement and founding chic, right? Is that founders chic, right? My bad. Founder chic, which seemed to reaffirm the exclusivity of the founding fathers, as again, in a civil religious vein, the American, quote, apostles of freedom. Seventh, and in conclusion, consider the mutable meanings of the myth in the 21st century in national as well as transnational context. Sheesh. These niggas is working. Can we go back up a little bit? Let's see what that said. Okay. So overview, seven founding fathers. Okay. Seven founding fathers, an overview, right? Said politicians are an integral part of the quote the mysteries of national formations. Terrible. Robert A. Ferguson, reading The Early Republic, right? It says America's founding fathers, the men who engineered a constitutional convention and drafted a new form of government for the loosely joined states in 1787, succeeded through the force of personal authority. And that's Joyce Appleby inheriting the revolution. Now, what is interesting about that, right? When we know that we already had forms of government, we already had the confederations, Iroquois confederations, we already had a republic, we already had these things going on before these people came here. So we taught them this, and that's just what it is. So the home of democracy, the home of republicanism, is America. It's not Rome. It's not Greece. It's America. Okay. So once again, we check the fact checkers. We check the checkers. We check the whistleblowers, right? That's just simple. And we've been over this a lot of times, and we can get into this when we talk about what is called the Great Law of Peace. We talk about Hiawatha. That's 1,000 years before this right here. More than 1,000 years before 1787. You understand what I'm saying? So I just want to put that in perspective. It's just not even up for debate at this point. You know what I'm saying? It's not up for debate, and they will tell you that. But once again, these people right here will just put this in this book. You know what I'm saying? And once again, we're here to get what we can get out of it. What they say, eat the meat, spit out the bones. It says, despite never-ending debates of who should or should not be considered a member, some definitions of the founding fathers have remained more or less constant in American historiography. Thus, in order to sketch the dominant version of the myth, let me name very briefly introduce those who are most often included in the Founding Fathers canon, right? Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Adams, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton, right? Says Benjamin Franklin. We'll go this a little bit. Benjamin Franklin, 1706, 1790, is the oldest member of the Founding Father group and still holds a central place among their ranks as, but here's my thing. Well, why is he not on Mount Rushmore? We'll get back to that. But shouldn't he be, if he's the oldest member, right? Shouldn't he be on Mount Rushmore? I don't know. Okay. Ranks as supposedly multi-talented politician, public educator, and scientist, and as a major representative of the American Enlightenment. In his autobiography, which has issued powerful self-representations of the Homo Americanus, and has become a highly canonical text. Franklin fashioned himself as the, quote, good parent who, quote, treats all Americans as his offspring. It's kind of like some German shit right there. Fatherland and shit. We'll get back to that. Morgan Benjamin Franklin, page 127, right? Due to his participation in the campaign for colonial unity, he was often referred to as, quote, the first American. I'll say this again. They quoted this nigga as, quote, the first American. But what about all the first Americans that was already here? What about them? See what I'm saying? See, once again, they put these ideas out there, you know. But he's the first American. You know what I mean? So I just thought that was really interesting. Benjamin Franklin is the first American. Interesting. It says, and that comes from H.W. Brand's book of the same title. Benjamin Franklin concocted it and self-declared combination of fragility, hard work, or fragility, I guess we say that, hard work, community spirit, intellectual. That's one of the ones right there. Intellectualism and democratic participation was highly influential in later myth making. He was famously portrayed by Joseph Seifert Duplessis and is commemorated on the $100 bill. During his lifetime, the Franklin cult was already international in scope and garnered a substantial transatlantic following. More recently, James Snowdes has reaffirmed his centrality by calling him the, quote, essential founding father. And that's did I get all that? Okay, so then somewhat are the grounds on which George Washington, 1732, 1799, right, one of the three Virginians in this group, has been elevated as a founding father. Washington was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army from 1775 to to 1783, and as such successful against the British military, right? He then oversaw the writing of the Constitution in 1787 and was later unanimously voted the first president of the United States. And that was in 1789 to 1797, right? During his presidency, many aspects and rituals of the U.S. government were established that are still being practiced today. Among them, is that them? Yeah, among them, the president's inaugural address. Right. Washington has often been given the epithet "father of his country." I'm sorry, father of his country, right? And thus holds a particularly prominent place among the fathers. Now, the other niggas, the first father or the first American, the most prominent father. I guess it's depending on who you're talking to. Now, this nigga is the father of the country, so he's the most, what they say, particularly prominent place. So he holds a prominent place among the founding fathers. Well, but he's on the dollar bill. Benjamin Franklin's on the $100 bill, so I don't know if that's too prominent over that. So that kind of answers that question, right? He's the father of the country and thus holds a particularly prominent place among the founders. In affirmative versions of the founders' myth, he is often referred to as, quote, a modern day Cincinnatus. That's what this is. And that's Firstingherg, Washington's farewell address, page 122, right? Also Willis, and it comes from Cincinnatus, page 35 to 37, page 248, 249, right? Because he allegedly did not strive for political power and planned to return to his plantation after the war for independence was won. As a Virginian, Washington was also, quote, a staunch advocate of American expansion. Taylor, and that's writing, page 176, and was among those founding fathers who owned slaves. Foundational Washington iconography includes the famous portraits by Charles Wilson Peale and Gilbert Stuart. The biographies by John Marshall, CF Life. It says Washington Irving, CF Life, and Madison Locke Weems, CF History, as well as the sculptures by John Anton Houlden and Horatio Greenough, right? Washington's birthday is a federal holiday celebrated on the third Monday of February. Carol Ann Marling has comprehensively documented Washingtonia in her book, George Washington Slept Here. That's in 1988. And Francois, there we go again, that Firstingherg has tried to show that the freely given voluntary worship of Washington effectively created a civil, religious, national consensus among Americans. That says in the name, page 70, right? Like Washington, Thomas Jefferson, 1743 to 1826, was a member of the Virginia. Oh yeah, that's funny. Since among Americans, like Washington, Thomas Jefferson was a member of the Virginia planter elite and thus a slaveholder. Once again, I thought like when they see when they talk about this whole thing as slavery, right? I just think it's really interesting that the people who's supposed to be doing research or whatever should be figuring it out. But you can't expect a Slav to who's following a script to push the truth. Like, why not tell that truth? It's a simple truth. It's really simple. That's not a hard thing when you're looking up these words. He held slaves. What does that mean? Did he have a wife? What rights did his wife have? What rights did his children have? His grandchildren have? You know what I'm saying? We have to be honest about these things, and we're talking about taxation and regulation and stuff like that. And that's what people were going to war with. That's what people are fighting over, to be free. And this is supposed to be the land of the free, the home of the brave. So we're the free. We're Americans, and they like to sorcery. That I don't fall for it. They like to use these words and talk. Damn! Just get to the point. Keep it simple. They don't want to do that. They want to bedazzle you and put. Man, shut up. Sheesh. It's really crazy. It said he served as delegate from Virginia to the Continental Congress and later on became the third president of the United States. Now, if they have a Continental Congress, right? So, and that means that somebody when he was the general, right? What was he doing before he was a general? Was he a colonel ever? Was he ever a major? Was he ever a lieutenant? When did he go to West Point to become a commissioned officer? I need to know these things. Shouldn't you guys want to know these things? Because they tell us all these special things. Shouldn't we want to know these things? When did these things happen? Where did he learn this? Right? So if he was a farmer, when did he learn to become a soldier? Who was his boss when he was a general? Like, we got to ask these questions. We need answers to them. See what I'm saying? So, back to these characters. This is crazy. Says the Continental Congress and later on became the third president of the United States. And that's in 1801, 1809. On his gravestone, Jefferson allegedly wished to be remembered for three things: as the author of the Declaration of Independence, as the author of the Virginia State for Religious Freedom, and as the founder of the University of Virginia. He purchased the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon in 1803. Can we see this bill of sales, you guys? I know they like to talk about it, but somebody's going to show us a bill of sales. Even if you just make one up, please make one up so we can see it. Please somebody email it to me. The bill of sales for the Louisiana Purchase from Thomas Jefferson and Napoleon in 1803, thus doubling the size of the U.S. territory, and supported the Lewis and Clark expedition, and that was in 1804, right? 1806 to explore it. So it was interesting, right? If these people was coming here since 1600s, right, or the late 1400s, so we're gonna say the 1500s, right? 1500s. So they didn't get to start expanding until the 1800s. Really? I'm just saying we gotta think about these things that we be saying. Like, just really kind of interesting. Really, really, seriously. It's really interesting. I want to say shout out to SJ, man. Appreciate the Only Builders, man. Somebody government on this thing. Shout out to SJ. Appreciate you, bro. It says the ideal of Jeffersonian democracy is often described as an agrarian vision of an imagined, quote, empire of liberty, which, right, is formulated in the notes, in his notes on the state of Virginia, right? The neoclassical Jefferson Memorial on the new classical. How do you have new classical? How are those even two things, those words put together? A new old nigga. That's like being fat and skinny at the same time. Hot and cold. Big and little. Like you know what I'm saying? Like up and down. Like it's just stupid. Neoclassical. Come on, bro. Like why are these but they do this on purpose. I'm telling y'all. This is what this dude was talking about. This is what they do on purpose. They do this shit on purpose. Like, this is crazy. This is really crazy to me, man. Because I'm reading it, this is crazy to me. The neoclassical, new old nigga, right? Jefferson Memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. was completed in 1947. And he is depicted on the rare $2 bill. He's a sucker. Because of the inconsistencies and contradictions of Jefferson's contributions to the national founding, Joseph Ellis has called him, quote, American Sphinx. I think that's crazy. In biographical appraisals, he has been given credit for his contributions and successes by Merle Peterson, right? And others, yet he has also been cast quite negatively as, quote, the greatest Southern reactionary. And as an influence on the Ku Klux Klan. Trying to know that. Says, okay, so we're going to get to James Madison. He's 1751, 1836. Is the third Virginian plantation owner. Well, newsflash for everybody. Everybody was a farmer. Everybody owned plantations. Even majority of the people here on this land, aka the Negroes. Because remember, because they had to come up with a 3/5 clause, we were the majority here then. Okay, and they didn't go to Africa and bring more Africans here than the people of this land, who they just reclassified and misclassified. And are y'all serious right now? Are we serious? This is crazy. Let's see, Saves the plantation owner ranks. Owner in the ranks of founding fathers. As a member of Congress in 1780 to 83, he urged the revision of the Articles of Confederation in favor of a stronger national government. As the primary author of the Constitution, he is often called, quote, the father of the Constitution and the father of the Bill of Rights. In co-authorship with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, he wrote the Federalist Papers. Power must be divided, Madison argued, both between federal and state governments, and within the federal government, right, checks and balances to protect individual rights from what he famously called, quote, the tyranny of the majority. With Jefferson, Madison formed the Republican Party. Okay, so they said with Jefferson, Madison formed the Republican Party. As the fourth president of the United States, 1809 to 1817, he entered a war against Britain, which is often referred to as the War of 1812. They also called it Mr. Madison's War. It ended inconclusively, but was considered a success by Americans and is thus often also labeled the Second War for Independence. Although he is considered one of the key founding fathers, John Adams, 1735 to 1826, never became the object of any large-scale national individual personality cult, which he seems to have anticipated himself, right? I mean, there was a guy played by Anthony Hopkins in Amistad. He played James Madison. You know, he's supposed to be this great lawyer, great thinker. Just thought that was kind of interesting. But he also played like a guy that was kind of like going against the system. So you know what I mean? So it could you could get a lot. You could probably get a lot of that out of James Madison. That he was fighting against a lot of the bullshit. You know what I'm saying? As far as even how they portray him. You know what I mean? Says the essence of the whole will be that Dr. Franklin's electrical rod smote the earth and outsprung General Washington, that Franklin electrified him with his rod, and henceforth these two concluded all the policy, negotiations, legislators, and war. These under did I say that? And henceforth these two conducted all the policy, negotiations, legislatures. Okay, hold on. These underscore lines contain the whole fable, plot, and catastrophe. It says Adam Adam was a lawyer and a political theorist and the author of Thoughts on Government, which early on promoted a checks and balanced and separated form of government. Okay, and suggested a bicameral legislature. Hey, we got Reginald Green. Shout out to Reginald Green, the background king, man. What's up, bro? Come on back in. See you. Anyway, we're just gonna slide through some of these guys, man. So right there, okay. So in the 1770s, the founders are competing propagandists who trade in treason for an uncertain cause and a mixed audience. Confused and divided, they face enormous problems in deciding what to say to whom and when. Neither the British nor the French, but factionalism is and remains their clearest enemy. Indeed, the possibility of collapse, though internal dissension, continues to haunt both political considerations and the literary imagination for generations, right? Based on their writings on republicanism and constitutionalism, Hannah Arendt lauds, quote, the thoughtful and eroded political theories of the founding fathers, right? And their, quote, deep concerns with forms of government. The political myth has provided a cohesive national discourse for the United States at the time when it still was characterized by strong local and regional interests. Still, the conflicts among the founding fathers and their different political trajectories have led Robert Levine to suggest in hindsight that there was, quote, no single American ideology or national narrative at the time of the founding, which is easy to prove. Like, no two people think alike, first and foremost. Also, these parties, even these fools right here, is talking as if these parties were started amongst the people. They might have been they were started after these people. These people did not start certain, like when they're talking about republicanism and democracy and stuff like that, instantaneously you start thinking about the Republican Party. Well, republicanism, we were already a republic. This is already a republic with which it stands. Well, we were already a republic. See, once again, this is them imposing themselves into power. Still, they're still doing it even when they're exposing this myth that made America, right? They're still pushing the power structure. This is the problem. And this is why we're here. We're gonna catch y'all every time, bro. This is what it is. Man, I can't even see. My eyes So we're gonna get back to this another time. Talk about this book. There's a lot of stuff up in here. Let's see. It says when discussing iconography of the founding fathers, one has to turn once again to the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and the Rotunda, where crucial scenes from the U.S. foundational mythology are exhibited. Whereas George Washington appears in the Rotunda in the Trumbull painting, General Washington resigning his commission, that's 1824, as commander in chief. The focus here will be on the representation of the group of founders in the Declaration of Independence, 1818, also about Trumbull, who painted a series of 4 rotunda paintings. The painting titled "The Declaration of Independence" is one of the most canonical renderings of the foundational moment of the exceptional union called the United States. Its title does not reference the founders' name, but their performative act of declaring independence, as well as document confirming that act, right? It is one among several iconic renderings of the foundational moments in U.S. history displayed in the Rotunda today, including Howard Chandler Christie's The Signing of the Constitution. He did that in 1940, as well as Barry Faulkner's mural, The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States in 1936, exhibited in the National Archives buildings, right? Now, what is interesting, you guys got to understand that they redid a lot of these paintings after stuff was burned down. See what I'm saying? So when they just came back, they just redid it. And then it would be like, you look at it, it'd be like, this is an artist rendition. And they'll be pushing certain narratives even in their artist renditions. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Pointed with Thomas Jefferson, who he also painted, and regularly met with him in Paris in 1786. Clearly, the scene in Trumbull's The Declaration of Independence depicts not the July 4th meeting of the founders, but an earlier one, probably the June 28th meeting, at which the committee appointed to present a draft of the document offered it up for consideration by the U.S. Congress. At the center of the composition, Jefferson submits the parchment to John Hancock, then president of the Continental Congress and the first signer of the Declaration. John Hancock, they'd be like, put your John Hancock right here, right? You know what I mean? He used to say he was the first signer. But he was what they say? He was the president. Hancock was the president of the Continental Congress and the first signer of the Declaration. So I wonder why they don't talk about old John Hancock as being a founding father of anything. You know what I'm saying? I think that's pretty interesting. Jefferson is surrounded by the other members of the drafting committee, some of which are more readily considered founding fathers than others. John Adams, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and Benjamin Franklin. In the background, 48 congressmen are clustered in groups of varying size. Most of them with their heads turned attentively to the committee. Contemporaries criticism of this painting held that it was static and repetitive, unoriginal, lacking in refinement, and historically inaccurate. Regardless of those critical responses, the painting has forcefully impacted the way the political founding of the U.S. has been viewed and remembered. Even in the founding fathers' discourse, has shifted to include George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, and to exclude Sherman, Livingston, and Hancock, who are less prominent today. Terrible. Terrible, I say. They made this shit up. Y'all believe this painting right here? Yeah, y'all really believe this? So how is it, right? How is it if these people are a minority, right? How is it that there's no people of color? All these guys with these all white wigs, like, come on, y'all, this look real. Think about it. Just think it all the way through, all the way through. Don't just like take it some of it. Think it all the way through. Does this look real? My man with his leg crossed right there. My man with his hand on his hip right there. I mean, all of them got the same hairstyle. Are we serious right now? Like nobody was rocking no locks. Nobody was no afro. Nobody. Come on, man. It's the Declaration of Independence, supposed to be 1818. Okay. It says, as for all criticism of Trumbull's image, art scholar Irma B. Hafe has reminded us that there was no precedent for painting such as the Declaration of Independence at the time. Wow, it says, how, am I gonna read that? No? Yeah. How was one to show a large group of ordinary looking men dressed not in the glamorous costumes of European courts or the crimson robes of English lords, but in everyday American garb, placed in a room undistinguished by any agricultural or architectural elegance, seated not on crimson and gold, but plain wood, Windsor chairs, leaning not on marble and Amolu tables, but desks covered with dull green baize, watching not the collapse of a national leader, but a committee presenting a report to a president of their body. How was one take these elements and make a painting that would speak to a nation's people as long as the nation survived? Says, thus, we need to take into account that Trumbull, who had previously painted mostly religious scenes and battle scenes, tried to work out a iconography and hagiography of American democracy by focusing on what he considered to be the central aspects of its foundation, the founding fathers, and the foundational document in a sensation of rational contemplation and ceremonial order. Shit. In 1818, Trumbull's iconic painting, still on the back of the US $2 bill today, which has recognized to be enormous national interest and historical significance, right, was displayed in New York in the Academy, in the American Academy of the Fine Arts, where some 8,000 people came to see it in only 1 month, and then toured Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore before it arrived in Washington in December 1819 and was presented to Congress. Quote, "The tour was a tremendous success and the high point of Trumbull's career. That this image, which attempts to balance the quote silence and solemnity of the scene with the wish for a picturesque and agreeable composition," as Trumbull himself phrased it in the catalog of early exposition, right, is highly stylized, appears to be obvious. Many scholars have emphasized the chaotic state of affairs and uncertainty of the outcome of any political actions at the time. I'm gonna say that again. I gotta say that again. That's it. Many scholars have emphasized the chaotic state of affairs and the uncertainty of the outcome of any political action at the time. Furthermore, there was a lack of protocol in the constitutional sessions that often led to a less orderly conduct than is portrayed in the Trumbull painting. Here, quote, "the impression prevails that Congress united faces the central group intent on what is occurring," end quote. Asked whether to exclude those delegates from the painting who did not sign the declaration and argued harshly against it. Both Jefferson and Adams advised Trumbull not to do so for reasons of accuracy and authenticity. The result is a piece of shit. A piece of art that was supposed to start, quote, a great national artistic tradition. A great national artistic tradition. Trumbull's iconic image is an example of affirmative 19th century memorial culture in regard to the U.S. foundational narrative. Even if Trumbull's painting does not visualize all the dimensions of the Founding Fathers myth, it does serve as a classic commemoration of the founding and in many ways is an instance of cultural nationalism in a state-dominated memory system. In what follows, it will serve as a backdrop against which different representations of perspectives on the founding fathers will be discussed. For now, we will take Ooh. You got to keep scrolling. Questions of legitimacy and authority connected to the foundational moment. What happened? Yeah. We're about to, I think I'm finished with this. Unless you got something that you want me to read. Because it's kind of going in a circle here. Definitely highlight. Okay. It says, I began this chapter by pointing out how the myth of the founding fathers pointedly relies on their authorship of foundational documents and how these documents in turn have enhanced time and again the frame of founding fathers, particularly when it comes to discussions of original intent. Some 20th century ass signatures right there. One of the define. What am I reading this right here? You got me reading a whole bunch of stuff. Definitely. So you have to highlight what this. Peace to everybody, man. I'm tired of shit. So smoke signal in the building. And 411. Shannon Porter back in the building. Prophet Levi. Chat room, man. Guys want to come in here, man. We're gonna get another song to him, man. We'll get it, bring the vibration back. I'm gonna talk about this a little bit, man. I'm gonna get up out of here. And we'll get you guys tomorrow tonight. It's just a bunch of talk, bro. Man, they do that. Oh my God, just talking in a circle, use words that don't need to use. Like, just come on, man. It's just so stupid. This shit is fake. No such. These niggas didn't exist. How about that? Let's just do that. That way we don't have to go back and forth. I ain't got to be like, well, no. They just didn't exist. It's fake. I know that sounds crazy, but why? Why? How? When these motherfuckers, they make up everything. I want to see I want to see the original. Now, when they don't have the original, that means that they made it up. It's a fake. They're talking in a circle. It's all fraudulent. Even the people that's saying that they up here for us or whatever, they're not doing anything. We'll talk. Yeah, let's play a couple songs, man. Somebody will come up and we'll get up out of here. Um, yeah, it's kind of late. Yeah, free Jazzy Tuck. Have flight time. CYT.
Run up the coma, son of a gunner. I'm trying to give me a hunter. I kick this shit like a punter. I keep a stick like a hunter. I turn this shit to the jungle. I came in straight out the dungeon, ready to rumble. I get the ball and won't fumble. Say that they're ready for war. I jump out the car and shoot your ass up at your mama's. I did this shit for the winter and for the summer. I fucked your bitch in the Hummer. I fucked your bitch at your house, all in your bed. You came home and found a condom. Niggas be hating on bosses. Niggas be faking. You niggas really be runners. Still a talking to these bitches. Ain't got no money. You niggas really be fun. Niggas be hating on you. Oh, when I see you, one when it be you, could he do? Didn't get money since niggas was rocking their diesel. Pocket looking like an emo. Bitches on me when they see the bitch, stop it, I see you. I ain't stopping when I see you. Niggas be talking about choco pop out when I see you. Bake the chocolate, leave you see you.
I get that money, I'm chasing that sack, I'm a bag mover. I punch that pad like I'm Jab Judah. I swat the pack, I'm a fast mover. Remember them days I was back in that trap and I had to go give me a sack. Catch a play and then I'm running it back. Nigga playing, know he bound to get whack. Boy, that's a fact. I'm smoking cookies gelato, you know I be keeping it thanks. All of these pussy ass niggas be talking, I let you pop all of your shit in the back. And I been rocking that Gucci, that Louis designer, you know I been dripping that specs. Bitches on me and they tryna attack. Why they said they tryna see where I'm at? Me and Jazzy, bitch, you turn to the max. Yeah, yeah.
Blowing money fast, feeling like me. Slide through with a broom, trying to sweep the whole street. Designer down, so you know it ain't cheap. Pay the stack for the shoes, so I'm walking on peas. This shit that I'm smoking, I'm barely can breathe. You mention my name when you come to the east. Big dog status got rank in the street. They was up, now I'm up, now them boys underneath. Took off on these niggas, they wish they can catch up. Told my little hitters, I shoot from the neck up. Drizzle got now, young nigga been next up. No young thug, I got me a check. I ain't got a check, so I do it like Nike. I up with this Drake, it's gonna bite you like Tyson. Won't snitch on one photo, I put that on the Bible. I'm strapped with this chopper looking for my ride. I'm swinging it still like I'm Harry Potter. Pour out the paint, we don't pour out the bottle. Ain't talking schoolwork, got problems we solve. This bitch that I'm fucking, she bad like a model. Babies in the trap, but ain't talking about tires. These rappers, my sons and most of them my daughters. We just fight like a pit, we don't do too much barking. I'm still in the trap, make it jump like a Carter.
Them suckers gon' come out that water, gotta go harder. I'm tryna whip up a Laura, used to be broke at the bar. This shit getting cold, gotta stay with that fire. Every other day, another nigga getting shot. Everywhere I go, bitch, I'm taking my Glock. Nigga think I'm lagged, then a nigga gon' die. These niggas ain't real, they bitches, they know they can win up. I'm low, my Glock up, ain't holding my head up, but feel a little better when I get the west side. I'm from that 220, 40 loaded 30, niggas ain't stepping on me. I leave you dead in the street, spin your block with choppers, back to back, hit and repeat. Niggas know what it is when I slide through. A bitch said she wanted, I bought her too. Cause I want a pilot, she kinda cool. And I like to stunt, so I got her too. Like I'ma give it, I got her fool. Only thing that I did was about the bitch some food. Ever since the day I started, been a down fool. King G. Yeah. Long little L.
Yeah, so um like I said, you know, these this, these things, you know, like even not only the concepts but the visuals that they're putting out are all a part of European um, mindset or Euros. You know, this is not American. This is a European. And like I said, you know, we should, when we're talking about America, you know, stress that. Like once again, that's not American culture. These people didn't start democracy. So if there's something already in place, you know what I'm saying, for centuries, So yeah, it's just really weird to me, you know. But once again, I don't know. Is this legal? Like just in general, like is this legal? Like we need to apply pressure around the board. So when they talk about Brown versus Board of Education, like integrating schools, did we really win off of this integration? Even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said about integrating these people into a burning house, or definitely a burning schoolhouse, definitely a burning church house. You know what I'm saying? Banks burning down for, like, you know what I mean? So it's yeah. What? How did that help us today? Like we just look at it today, and once again, dude felt, you know, like once again he can't understand how we feel because it's not us. No matter if you could be, you know, experience or be around or do all this or whatever, you're still not gonna feel it because you have a different upbringing, a different way of looking at things. You know what I'm saying? So people wouldn't understand that unless you were brought up in that. You can't come and think you can. Yeah, it's just crazy. So um, yeah, man. So it's really interesting. Chief of Don X, Hefe in the building. Peace to the guys, man. Everybody, man, tap in. Just favorite, man. Like, share, subscribe, man. You guys already know, man. Support the real. Yeah, man. Aboriginal to the dirt. I mean, this shit crazy. But those narratives, along with what they're teaching in school, you know what I mean, and just to, it's almost like they turn around and be like, "Well, look, you guys were the ones saying it. We wasn't the ones saying it." Yeah, I like that. That's facts. That's what it's all about. Made themselves feel better. Made themselves, you know, created these narratives, base these narratives around themselves. You know, around their, you know, from the Christopher Columbus lie. You know what I'm saying? It's not even. It's just not. It's just. They wouldn't even exist. And then we hear about just like, you know, these guys would be like, "Oh yeah, I read a Christopher Columbus diary." Oh yeah, you must have been the one that he threw in the ocean, and you know, in hopes because he thought they were going to shipwreck. According to their story, this is all story. Just like me telling the story as if it's real, then that makes me look like a goddamn fool because I'm talking about Harry Potter now. You know what I'm saying? No, it's not real. Now, system has happened, but they didn't come to America in the late 1500s or the early 1500s, going in 1600s. Nothing. It took over nothing. Not no guns, not no tanks. None of that happened. That's a lie. But they push these stories, and you're like, well, why would you push the story? Well, it's to make them feel better and to make you feel less. Create this whole narrative. It's just as simple as that. And psychological warfare, that's a part of psychological warfare. It's military tactics. So, and it's just weird when I see people, you know, falling for it, supporting it, you know what I'm saying, using it against people. It's really weird to me. So, yeah, man. Appreciate everybody, man, tapped in. Appreciate everybody, man, and support the kids, man, the endeavors and the fundraising things we got going on. I really appreciate you guys. It's a lot of love, man. Appreciate the love from everybody tapped in, man. So real talk, man. We got a major announcement Friday. You guys already know tomorrow. Only builders, man. So if you want to guys are interested in being Only Builders 2022 at gmail.com, and tap in. We'll send you the information on membership for that. Yeah, man, like I said, we got some great things, man. Tomorrow, Only Builders tomorrow, man. We're gonna get into some billionaire talk tomorrow, man. Who wants to be a billionaire? We're gonna talk that billionaire talk tomorrow, man. So tune in tomorrow, man. Only Builders, man. I think we're gonna try like 5 Eastern, guys. So look out for that tomorrow. Only Builders 2022 at gmail.com, man. Shout out to Anthony L. Pickens Jr. He's in the building. Peace to the guy, man. How you doing, brother? Yeah, man. But word spells are motherfucker, boy. I swear. You gotta be careful. What you believe, what you see is because somebody wrote it down, or something that somebody said something so eloquently, spoke it so good, said all the words just right. You know what I'm saying? That guy. Fuck out of here. You know what I'm saying? Then, oh my God. Niggas forked tongue. That's why they can say all those words like that. The tongue is forked like a fucking snake. You know what I'm saying? Some type of reptilian thing. So, yeah, man. So I appreciate everybody, man. Tap in. It's the GOAT. Man, we're gonna get ready to tap. We're ready to turn it in for the night, man. So you guys just want to chill out, man. It's all good. No problem. Can't Worry King, man, 2022 celebrity basketball game, man, July 19th. You got support the kids, man. Get involved. You already know, man. Only Builders. Press GOAT, man. You already know, man, as well. We are 2am.com, man. Get your exclusive Aboriginal drip, man. We are 2am.com. Wake up. It's time. It's 2 a.m. We are 2 a.m., man. The official home of the exclusive Supreme Chief holiday collection, man. Chief Billy line, man. Y'all go get y'all some drip, man. Shit's fire, man. Real talk. So appreciate everybody, man, tapping in, man. They love everybody. They get the 2 a.m. gear, man. They love their stuff, man. So appreciate everybody that support us, man. So shout out to y'all, man. Shout out to Garfield Rube, man. I try to, man. Just try to keep it just like I'm regular, man. I'm a regular person, man. Just we all have different callings, you know. Everybody ain't trying to be out there, man. So I'm trying to love, man, and give it how I can give it, man. Shout out to Comanche 504 in the building. Peace to the God, man. Appreciate you guys tapped in, man. For real, for real. So, man, I'm gonna get up out of here, you guys. You already know, man. It's Mr. Miyagi. It's the GOAT. Let's go.
I'm rose gold dip, money so blue it look like Crips. Work so good this shit gon' flip. Sauce so strong this shit gon' drip, 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 drip. Dope so good these hoes gon' bite. All these bitches nigga, all this ice. Everything now God drop these pipe. Flex by what I made these niggas. They kill center, I raise these niggas. Rose showers, I spray these bitches. Hate me, love me, don't make no difference. Backwood rolled up, nigga, I smoke. Trap girl with me everywhere I go. Cocaine flow, my shit so dope. All these D's wrap round my throat. TTG, I'm trained to go. Money over bitches, I don't love these hoes. I FDP, I fuck that bitch. CDC, cut that chick. No control, I don't play no game. Knock up SD, hold my name. 4.6, I'm out of your range. Nigga Bruce Lee kid like a young Luke Kane, like whoa. Yeah, hopping out the Rari. Kick it like karate. Mr. Miyagi. No one can stop me. Dancing. Mr. Miyagi. Kid hopping out the Rari. Kick it like karate. Mr. Miyagi. No one can stop me. Dancing, dancing. Dancing, dancing. Dancing, dancing. Corner store. Hustle, yeah, I work that store. Got it at the pot, yeah, I work that store. North Guard nigga, boy, I birthed that coast. Still in my style, can't work no more. Uptown nigga, boy, I made that swag. Mask up on you, come take that bag. Real true hustle, I'ma make that bag. Real street nigga, I don't play like that. All the way live, baby girl, I'm a real one. Bloody girl up on you, go OJ Simpson. I don't play with these niggas, better check my pen. Mexico flag, better check these trenches. Still like Gucci, all my children. Nigga ain't with it, then you might as well killing. Nigga ain't gang, I'm feeling. Cut a nigga hand off, bitch, keep stealing. You went in the horseshoe with me. Who taught that dog fooling me? I was in shootout after shootout after shootout with them niggas across the street. These niggas all off a beat. I made it all off a D. But till a nigga dead or they bust my head, we don't call off the beef. Kid hopping out the Rari. Kick it like karate. Mr. Miyagi. No one can stop me. Dancing, dancing. Dancing, dancing. Dancing, dancing. Mr. Miyagi. Kid hopping out the Rari. Kick it like karate. Mr. Miyagi. Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah, man. You guys have a great night. See you guys tomorrow. Shout out to all the builders, man. See you guys tomorrow. We out.